Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the fog-laced hills of Michoacan, where every rooster's crow might be a warning, and every path bends not just with geography, but with unspoken history. Picture it now, low-hanging mist curling around corn stalks, old pickup trucks idling on dirt roads, and radios tuned to ranchera ballads, masking darker conversations. This isn't just rural Mexico. It's the beginning of something vast. Something you probably wouldn't survive in flip-flops and good intentions. Tonight, we begin the story of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, a man better known as El Mencho, the phantom kingpin of the 2020s. He doesn't start as a myth. He starts as a kid with sticky fingers and sharp ears, hauling oranges under the sun, unknowingly destined to become the invisible engine behind one of the world's most powerful drug cartels. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning haze doesn't lift easily in Michoacan. It clings like secrets. It's 1980-something, and a teenager named Nemesio wakes up with the sound of pigs squealing and roosters throwing shade in stereo. His family, humble but not hopeless, lives just outside Aguililla, a place with more dust than dreams. There's no silver spoon here, just the sharp end of a machete and the familiar ache of calloused hands. He loads crates of citrus onto a rickety truck, his face half shadowed by a straw hat. His father says little. His brothers say less. In a region where men don't speak unless they mean it, silence teaches its own curriculum. The lesson begins early. Trust the mountains, not the law. Even as a teenager, Nemesio notices things. How one uncle never works, yet always has cash. How the mayor's cousin shows up once a month in a new truck, but nobody ever sees him sell a single goat. He watches, listens, learns, and more importantly, he never forgets. The smell of gasoline and overripe fruit lingers in his clothes as he walks the 3 miles back home from the day's haul. The hills above him hum with a quiet rhythm. Somewhere, someone's cooking meth. Someone's burying a rifle. Someone's whispering about Guadalajara. Even if he doesn't understand the details yet, Nemesio knows one thing. Whatever future he wants won't come from this orchard. Back then, the cartels are still forming their borders. The Guadalajara cartel is crumbling, and its disciples are scrambling for fragments of empire. Names like Felix Gallardo and Amado Carrillo are dominating headlines, if you're reading the papers. But Nemesio isn't. He's too busy memorizing routes, timing police patrols, and learning which bribes work best at which checkpoints. One night, a cousin returns from California in a Jeep, with chrome rims and eyes that dart like they're chasing ghosts. He tells stories of cocaine hidden in avocado crates and bosses who pay better than God. They need drivers, he mutters over mezcal. Guys who can keep their mouths shut. Nemesio doesn't say yes. He just doesn't say no. That's his style. He starts small. One drive north with a sealed tire, no questions asked. $200 and a free burrito later, he's hooked. Not on the thrill, but the math. He realizes moving drugs is like solving a maze. Find the blind spots, predict the mice, keep the cheese out of reach. Historical fact? In the early 1990s, the U.S. ramped up border security under Operation Gatekeeper. This forces traffickers to innovate, smaller loads, better scouts, more creative smugglers. Nemesio adapts early. He becomes the guy who gets product through without needing a gun in his hand. Efficiency, not theatrics. In the next few years, he crosses into the U.S. more than once, sometimes for business, sometimes for survival. One arrest in the late 90s lands him a brief stint in a U.S. prison on heroin charges, but it's not a tragedy. It's a classroom. There, he learns how the other side thinks, how DEA agents build cases, how plea deals work, and most importantly, how to disappear before the paperwork finishes printing. Some say prison broke him. Others say it refined him. Many people still think that stretch behind bars was where he first truly decided to build something of his own. So what do you think? Was it punishment? Or was it prep school? Back home in Mexico, he moves differently. He avoids nightclubs, hates flashy clothes, doesn't drink too much. The local narcos call him El Fantasma, because even when he's right in front of you, he feels elsewhere. When CJNG will eventually emerge, this becomes his signature. Power without performance, terror without the trumpet. By the early 2000s, he's no longer the kid loading fruit. He's the man financing routes, making payoffs, and auditing lieutenants like a ghostly CEO. His hands still look rough, but they're no longer from picking oranges. They're from squeezing necks slowly, financially, politically, and sometimes literally. And through it all, Michoacan remains quiet. The trees still fruit. The fog still rolls. But everyone knows those hills aren't empty anymore. They belong to someone now, someone who once hauled crates, but now moves empires. The orchard fades, but its discipline lingers. Nemesio doesn't shed his past. He recycles it. The long hours, the quiet resentment, the muscle memory of bending without breaking, all of it follows him like a shadow stitched into the seams of his plans. By now, the Guadalajara cartel has splintered like dry bone. The Sinaloans are grabbing turf with the greed of young warlords, and every ambitious lieutenant with 2 trucks and a cousin in customs is laying claim to his own empire. Nemesio sees the chaos not as a threat, but as opportunity poorly organized. He starts aligning himself with a crew attached to the Milenio cartel, an outfit with fingers in synthetic drugs and toes in Michoacan's valleys. Their operation isn't the most famous, but it's tidy, structured, and just removed enough from the headlines to grow unnoticed. That's what he likes best. His early jobs aren't glamorous. He's not waving pistols in corridos or wearing Versace at cockfights. Instead, he's the guy who knows which accountant in Guadalajara has a gambling problem, or which local commander's nephew needs a new motorcycle and some confidence. In that silence, power grows. It's the same with fruit trees and syndicates. Roots before branches. There's a story whispered through the ranks about how he once helped a rival's cousin cross the border, risked his own pipeline for it. No threats, no payoff expected. Just a favor dropped into the dirt like a seed. 5 years later, that cousin's running customs in Sonora. And guess who he still takes midnight calls from? The other traffickers call him low profile. But low profile doesn't mean small. It means he's planning to outlive all the noise. Mainstream historical fact. By the mid-2000s, methamphetamine production in Mexico began overtaking traditional routes of cocaine and marijuana. Meth was easier to make, harder to trace, and more profitable. This fit Nemesio's style perfectly. No flashy loads, no jungle airstrips, just quiet labs buried in the folds of Michoacan. He becomes obsessed with process, supply chains, distribution metrics. He's not running a gang, He's building a logistics firm with bullets in the margins. His attention to detail becomes legend. One time, a load arrives 12 hours late. The driver blames road closures. Nemesio doesn't yell. He simply nods, walks to the back of the warehouse, and points out a route that would have shaved off the delay. Quiet efficiency, deadly in its clarity. It's around this time that he marries Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. Her family isn't just respected in the underworld. They're practically the Ivy League of the meth business. Her brothers run the financial arteries of the Mencho cartel. With this union, Nemesio doesn't just gain a wife. He gains an accounting department, a distribution network, and a buffer between him and direct exposure. He doesn't treat the family like in-laws. He treats them like shareholders, and he demands results. But like every organization grown too big, the Mencho cartel starts to buckle. Its leadership grows split between those loyal to old ways and those following Nemesio's quiet new efficiency. The moment of rupture doesn't come with a bang. It comes with an arrest. The government detains key leaders of Mencho, and suddenly, there's a vacuum. Others scramble to claim the remains. Nemesio? He waits, watches, and when the moment's right, he absorbs the pieces and renames the operation. CJNG, Cartel de Jalisco New Generation. Now, it's not just about meth or roots. It's about redefining how a cartel breathes. The rebrand is subtle but deliberate. CJNG is cleaner in name, more local in identity, and terrifying in silence. They don't put on shows, they put out statements. In blood, yes, but also in structure. Municipalities begin noticing improvements. Basketball courts, freshly painted schools, food drives. Many think it's community outreach. Others say it's just good optics. So what do you think? The truth is, Nemesio knows image. He doesn't want to be liked. He wants to be accepted, like the weather or taxes. Inevitable, mundane, permanent. One of his first major moves? Eliminating La Resistencia, a rival splinter faction that thought it could fill the Mencho vacuum. But El Mencho doesn't fight like others. He doesn't rally armies in broad daylight. He moves chess pieces in whispers. Suddenly, La Resistencia finds their lieutenants missing. Warehouses raided. Bribed cops switching allegiances. By the time they realize they're at war, they've already lost. Nemesio doesn't pop champagne. He just issues new uniforms and updates the ledgers. CJNG is now the most rapidly expanding criminal network in Mexico, and barely anyone outside government circles knows his name, except for one DEA agent stationed in Mexico City. She's young, meticulous, and deeply suspicious of this new Jalisco group that seems to rise without visible leadership. She tries tracing bank transactions tied to Rosalinda's relatives, but the numbers don't add up. Funds disappear into shell farms, fake schools, even construction companies that never pour a single slab of concrete. One file lands on her desk with the words, N. Oseguera Cervantes. She circles it in red and underlines it twice, but the paper trail stops cold. No credit cards, no phone calls, just the occasional blurred sighting in Aguililla. It's like chasing a shadow that edits itself, and somewhere in a dusty Michoacan warehouse, Nemesio hears whispers about the DEA's curiosity. He smiles faintly, not because he feels threatened, but because the timing is perfect. Visibility only matters when you want to disappear again. Meanwhile, his neighbors still see him the same way, just a quiet man with dry boots, an old truck, and eyes that never blink too long. Rain hits the tin roofs like a typewriter at war. Aguililla is slick with mud, and the hills glisten with something that's not just water. Somewhere out of sight, a convoy snakes up the road, its headlights off, its passengers wordless. Nemesio stands at a window, cup of coffee in hand, listening more than watching. It's 2005, and he's already several moves ahead. The CJNG is still forming its marrow, its name whispered like a question. Did you hear they showed up in Tepalcatepec? Who are they with? It's not the Sinaloans, right? At the heart of that ambiguity stands Nemesio, still more strategist than celebrity. His power doesn't scream. It hums. Then comes a call. One of his drivers, young, twitchy, brave in the stupid way, has gone off script. He gets pulled over just north of Colima with a shipment that wasn't supposed to move for another 48 hours. Worse, he talks. Not much, but enough. The fallout is surgical. Nemesio doesn't rant. He doesn't dramatize. He holds a quiet meeting in the back of a greenhouse, steam rising from drying leaves. The driver's cousin shows up to work the next morning and finds a bundle of cash on his doorstep, enough to pay off the house. But no one sees the driver again. That's how El Mencho operates. One hand writes checks, the other folds men into silence. It's also around this time he begins to form a habit, one that will later become infamous. He visits cockfights. Not for fun, though he seems to enjoy the spectacle. It's for networking. In those dusty rings, under cover of feathers and blood, alliances are made with a nod, favors exchanged behind the bleachers, enemies studied, not fought. You'll see him in a pressed shirt, boots shined, drinking tamarind soda while watching two roosters tear at each other like politicians on debate night. Someone offers to take a photo. He declines. Always mainstream historical fact. Cockfighting, while banned in many parts of Mexico, still operates openly in various states, often protected by local officials on cartel payrolls. For figures like Nemesio, these events double as unrecorded summits. CJNG's operations grow more efficient and more terrifying. In Veracruz, a rival gang's members are found dead, wrapped in duct tape, labeled with handwritten signs. This is what happens when you try to sell poison where we grow medicine. The message is metaphorical and pointed, but what most people miss is the logistical precision behind it. Every single body had been tracked, every sign handwritten by the same calligrapher. Even the vehicles used in the operation were later torched with lemon peels to mask chemical traces. To Nemesio, fear works best when dressed in ritual, yet not every operation is flawless. In 2007, a key meth shipment meant for Arizona goes missing. Not hijacked, not intercepted, just missing. Some say the Sinaloa cartel lifted it. Others think a CJNG lieutenant betrayed him. So Nemesio makes an unusual move. He personally visits a contact in Tepic, an old man who once ran gun shipments for a political party that shall not be named. They speak over broth and tortillas. No threats, no boasts, just soft-spoken theory. If something vanishes, Nemesio says, it's either magic or you didn't see who opened the door. By the next week, the missing shipment reappears in a warehouse in Baja, untouched. Nobody claims credit. But two men go missing from the Sinaloan side, and a third quietly switches allegiances. It's this calculated patience, this long view of the game, that makes CJNG different. While the Zetas revel in brutality and the Sinaloans flaunt charisma, Nemesio builds something colder, a cartel that doesn't want attention. It wants longevity, yet cracks begin to show. even in the cleanest structures. One of his lieutenants, a cousin of his wife, begins growing too loud. Expensive watches, selfies in front of gold-plated SUVs, videos leaked on Facebook showing him with pop stars. Nemesio says nothing. For weeks, then the cousin gets arrested at a gas station with no backup, no warning. Rumor says El Mencho tipped off the police himself, not out of betrayal, but to protect the organization's image. Mistakes, he tells a confidant later, are cheaper when someone else pays the receipt. Many people still think this was the beginning of Nemesio's internal cleansing campaign. So what do you think? Does a man remain loyal to family or to the idea of survival? Even with these quiet removals, CJNG continues expanding. It's no longer a shadow cartel. It's the new template. Cities like Guadalajara, Colima, and Morelia start to see unfamiliar trucks, unfamiliar faces, but familiar methods. Always clean, always fast, always decisive. By 2010, local law enforcement is effectively paralyzed, either bought, blackmailed, or outgunned. In some cases, CJNG officers are better equipped than the police. Their radios encrypted, their uniforms cleaner, their intelligence sharper. At one point, a CJNG convoy rolls through a checkpoint staffed by federal agents. No shots fired, no words exchanged. Just a nod, because everyone knows who runs that stretch of road. One of the agents writes in his notebook later, "The uniforms change, the orders don't." Nemesio begins investing in something rare, loyalty without desperation. He starts offering decent salaries to his inner circle, paid vacations, even health coverage. Not because he's generous, but because desperation breeds betrayal. He prefers his soldiers calm, not cornered. In a ranch house outside Tepalcatepec, he lays out a map. Colored dots mark each region. Blue for supply, red for conflict, green for finance. He taps the red ones with the back of a pen and murmurs, "These will go first." And they do. CJNG moves like fog, visible only in hindsight. Meanwhile, the orchards back in Aguililla still bloom, and the neighbors still shake their heads and say, "He used to pick fruit, you know. Never said much. Still doesn't." The air in Guadalajara hums differently now. It used to be a city of mariachi, tequila, and whispered promises. But beneath the surface, something colder has nested in the bones of its streets. CJNG doesn't march in. It materializes. Like mildew in a forgotten closet or frost on a window you swore was sealed. Suddenly, businesses that never used to pay protection are getting silent visits. Politicians, once proud of their independence, start choosing their words like they're on borrowed breath. And somewhere above it all, Nemesio watches from a distance, the architect of a presence that doesn't need a face. In 2011, the headlines finally catch up. A convoy of CJNG soldiers moves through Veracruz in broad daylight. At a shopping mall parking lot, 35 bodies are dumped, neatly, chillingly, with notes declaring them Zetas. It's a scene so brazen that even jaded locals flinch. Mainstream historical fact. That very act marked CJNG's first undeniable national introduction. They didn't sneak in, they announced themselves. But the message wasn't just for rivals, it was for the Mexican government too. The Zetas, known for their raw, militarized brutality, were suddenly outmaneuvered by a quieter, colder force. And unlike Zetas, CJNG had discipline. No viral torture videos, no messy theatrics, just clean executions and ledger lines. In that moment, Nemesio doesn't gloat. He shifts his attention to how the media handles it. He watches for language. What gets called a massacre? What gets called a warning? What goes unnamed altogether? He's not just building a cartel. He's managing a narrative. Word begins to travel across Sinaloa, Tamaulipas, Guerrero. There's a new game in town, and its players don't talk. They just show up. Back in Jalisco, he tests loyalty with subtle traps. A lieutenant in Puerto Vallarta is told to wait for a shipment without specifics. The truck arrives late, deliberately. The lieutenant panics and calls for backup, breaking protocol. 3 days later, he's reassigned to Sahuayo. A week later, he's gone. No blood, no spectacle, just a quiet correction. That's Nemesio's style. He's the kind of man who removes a faulty tooth without waking the patient. There's an old story whispered around his closest circles. During a meeting in an abandoned bullring, a vendor mistakenly delivers coffee laced with a strong sedative, meant for someone else. Nemesio sips it, senses something off, and simply walks away mid-sentence. He doesn't run, doesn't panic. He disappears into the night. The next day, the vendor's cart is found at the bottom of a ravine. No one ever mentions the coffee again. Some say that moment marked the start of his obsession with personal security. From then on, he limits contact to a tight ring, avoids digital traces, sleeps in a different location every night, never the same driver twice in a row. And while the world starts to learn his name, El Mencho, he begins retreating behind the curtain he built. Every new CJNG expansion across Mexico is attributed to his lieutenants, his commanders, his men. But never him. He becomes a myth in real time. At a wedding in Tepatitlan, guests whisper that El Mencho is there, watching from a distance, his daughter dancing with a man rumored to be his future son-in-law. But no photos emerge. No witnesses can say they saw him directly. Just a silver truck that left 15 minutes before the music stopped. That daughter, by the way, Jessica, becomes a key figure in his strategy. Not in violence, but in image. She manages businesses, farms, and a growing portfolio of legal fronts. Flower shops, construction firms, even a juice company. The paperwork is clean. The taxes filed. It's corporate camouflage at its finest, and Nemesio understands better than anyone. Hiding in the light is safer than hiding in the dark. Many people still think El Mencho hates publicity because it keeps him safe. But what if he hates it because it makes his people lazy? So what do you think? Is anonymity protection, or is it leverage? The CJNG machine continues spreading like ink in water. Towns that once pledged allegiance to Sinaloa quietly switch banners. Graffiti appears overnight. Simple letters, CJNG, painted in black across bridges and abandoned bus stops. No slogans, just initials, like a signature on a sealed envelope. In some areas, they show a strange kind of benevolence. In 2013, after a small village in Michoacan suffers a drought, CJNG shows up with water trucks and canned goods. No banners, no speeches, just resources and silence. One priest says, "It's like being saved by the devil and not knowing whether to thank him or hide your soul. But there's no mistaking the message. You're safer with us than without us. And safety, when scarce, becomes currency." Even federal forces start to notice a shift. Their informants dry up. Locals stop cooperating. Arrests lead to nowhere. Files go missing. It's not just fear. It's a form of trust. The kind that comes from results, not promises. Nemesio, meanwhile, becomes increasingly untouchable. Even the DEA acknowledges in an internal memo that his movements are ghost-like, his habits undocumented. One agent writes, "He doesn't move like a drug lord. He moves like a paranoid economist with a killer's smile." In Michoacan, they say the forest breathes with his decisions. By the time 2014 rolls around, CJNG is no longer a rising threat. It is the threat. The group has effectively split Mexico in half. North is still Sinaloa dominant, but the center and west? They're painted in quiet CJNG green. And through it all, Nemesio still keeps to his playbook. No social media, no bodyguards with big egos, no interviews or press leaks. When he visits a town, he does so without warning and leaves without proof. He's become a legend with a schedule. The dirt path outside Aguililla curves like a question mark into the forest. Birds chirp, the trees sway lazily, and if you didn't know better, you'd think nothing dangerous ever walked here. But somewhere between the banana trees and the cows chewing without care, a man once returned. Not as a boy, not as a mule, but as the quiet architect of an empire. Nemesio walks through his hometown without fanfare. The locals call him Don, softly, not loudly, as if the air might carry the word too far. They say he still visits occasionally, drops in unannounced, buys a few tacos, tips 100 pesos, checks on the water tank project. Then he vanishes. But in 2015, the shadows shift again. He's not just a kingpin anymore. He's become a problem. CJNG has grown too fast. It's everywhere. Guadalajara, Veracruz, even creeping into Baja California. Its reach starts to choke rival groups, disrupt old alliances, and most importantly, draw too much attention. The Mexican government, pressured by the DEA and national headlines, decides it's time to do something dramatic. They launch Operation Jalisco, a coordinated assault designed to strike at the core of CJNG. The objective? Find El Mencho and break the back of his rising cartel before it becomes uncontainable. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well. The operation begins with an attempted arrest near Villa Purificación. What the authorities don't expect is CJNG's response. Within hours, the cartel deploys rocket-propelled grenades against a military helicopter. The Black Hawk is shot down. 7 soldiers die. It's one of the boldest, most shocking attacks on Mexico's armed forces in recent history. Historical fact. On May 1st, 2015, CJNG became the first cartel to successfully shoot down a military helicopter using an RPG. The act stunned both Mexican and U.S. officials, showing just how well-armed and organized Nemesio's crew had become. It wasn't just an act of violence. It was a press release written in fire. After that, Jalisco goes into lockdown. Roadblocks appear. Burned vehicles clog intersections. CJNG cells coordinate blockades across multiple municipalities. Banks are robbed, gas stations torched, federal agents surrounded. It's not chaos, it's choreography, and at the heart of it all, Nemesio is nowhere to be seen. The operation fails. No capture, no confirmed sighting, just scorched roads, missing men, and the lingering taste of embarrassment for the government. Many believe that moment was when El Mencho transcended his cartel. He stopped being a name on a most wanted list and became something bigger, a symptom of the system. So what do you think? Was that the day he became untouchable, or just more hunted? From that point forward, every agency has eyes on him. The U.S. offers millions for information. The Mexican Navy increases surveillance. Every ranch and safe house from Nayarit to Michoacan is suddenly suspect. But Nemesio adjusts his playbook again. He stops using phones entirely. Switches to hand-delivered messages, often passed through children or elders. His locations rotate like numbers on a lock. Some days he sleeps under tarps in the forest. Other days, in high-end condos under fake names. But never in the same place twice. They say he once lived inside a converted cave, dry-walled, with Wi-Fi, 2 exit tunnels, and a guard dog named Pancho. Just for 3 nights. Even among his inner circle, His routines are unpredictable. He speaks in riddles, gives vague instructions, and makes lieutenants second-guess their next move. It's not paranoia, it's design. A nervous underling is less likely to betray you if they can't find you to begin with. Meanwhile, the CJNG structure evolves. Nemesio institutes a decentralized model. Instead of one chain of command, he breaks CJNG into semi-autonomous cells, each responsible for its region, each financially independent, but all loyal to the umbrella. This makes raids ineffective. Arrest one boss, another slides in. Shut down one lab, a new one appears before the ink dries on the report. It's a cartel that behaves more like a startup. Lean, responsive, modular. And Nemesio? He's the invisible CEO. His enemies multiply. Los Zetas are weakening, but Sinaloa, they don't appreciate the competition. Old school bosses like Ismael El Mayo Zambada and sons of El Chapo begin pushing back. Territories like Tijuana and Sonora become battlegrounds, each bloodier than the last. But Nemesio doesn't play their game. While they post videos and make headlines, he sharpens the edges of his silence. One curious footnote. Around this time, a series of anonymous tips begins leaking to the press. Details about Sinaloa routes, names of lower-level operatives. Many suspect it's Nemesio feeding the fire, letting others burn while he vanishes deeper. Back in Jalisco, civilians begin to notice a strange duality. CJNG brings fear, but also services. They fix roads, offer loans, police local crime. In some towns, cartel members act more like government than the actual government. There's a video, never aired publicly, of a town hall meeting where a mayor is berated, not by citizens, but by a man in a white shirt and cowboy hat who isn't on the official payroll. Guess who? Even the kids know better. They whisper legends about El Mencho with the same reverence usually reserved for saints or ghosts. He helped my uncle find work, says one boy. But he also made Don Lucho disappear, says another. One teacher in Tepocatepec writes in her journal, "Our textbooks tell one story, but our streets teach another." And perhaps that's what Nemesio understands best. Power isn't about dominance. It's about becoming the weather. You don't argue with the rain. You put on a coat. Still, the pressure mounts. The DEA leaks new photos. Offers of reward climb. Rosalinda, his wife, is briefly detained. Properties are seized. Bank accounts frozen. And yet, operations don't slow. If anything, they become cleaner. Many people still think he should have cracked by now. But Nemesio doesn't just survive. He thrives. So what do you think is keeping him afloat? Fear? Faith? Or the fact that he knew, long ago, that this war wasn't about drugs. It was about systems, and CJNG was the only system built to endure. There's a rhythm to vanishing, a discipline to staying present without ever being visible. And by 2016, Nemesio has turned disappearance into art. He moves like smoke, traceable only after the room has cleared. His enemies are louder, flashier. His rivals upload their threats, record their kills, buy matching gold pistols. Nemesio buys time. When a lieutenant asks him if they should release a video to claim responsibility for a local ambush, he simply says, "Why scream when everyone's already listening?" His version of violence isn't meant for show, it's meant for function. And this year, function has a new name, El Azulito, one of Nemesio's younger enforcers, fresh out of Chiapas, who's about to make waves CJNG won't recover from easily. El Azulito's cell is ambitious, brutal, and reckless. He pushes CJNG deeper into Guanajuato. a region long claimed by Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. The clash is messy. Buses burned, civilians caught in the middle, a journalist kidnapped for daring to write, "CJNG loses ground." The truth? It's a rare misstep. The violence draws heat. Too much. Federal police roll in. The DEA ramps up pressure. American journalists, mostly quiet until now, start circling, and Nemesio, predictably, hates it. He doesn't punish El Azulito immediately. That's not his style. He simply moves resources elsewhere, lets the young enforcer drown in his own smoke. A month later, Azulito disappears from Guanajuato. Rumors say he's alive but exiled. Others say he's mulch beneath a lemon grove. CJNG tightens. Nemesio sharpens. Mainstream historical fact. In 2016, the DEA elevated El Mencho to their top priority target, placing him alongside the likes of Al-Qaeda operatives. It was the first time a Mexican drug lord had reached that level of focus since El Chapo's capture. He's now the face of the new drug war. And yet, no one can find him. Some DEA agents believe he's still in Mexico, never more than 50 miles from his childhood home. Others claim he's fled to Guatemala or Belize, slipping in and out of ranches using back roads so twisted they never show on Google Maps. But here's the interesting part. No one can agree on what he wants. Does he want a truce? A political deal? A quiet life by a lake once things calm? Or is he playing the longest game of all, outlasting rivals, burning bridges behind him, and one day handing off CJNG to someone even less visible? So what do you think? Is he stalling for survival or planning a peaceful exit? In truth, Nemesio begins focusing on something that surprises even his closest watchers. Drones. Yes, flying drones, but not for surveillance, for weaponization. By late 2016, CJNG engineers, many recruited from local universities under the guise of construction internships, begin modifying commercial drones. They're retrofitted with explosives, small, precise, deadly. The first known test is quiet. A single drone flies over a rival safe house in Michoacan and drops a small payload onto a tin roof. No deaths, but a message is sent. Within 6 months, the design is refined. By early 2017, a CJNG drone strikes a federal convoy outside Tepalcatepec. 2 officers injured. No one killed. But again, that's not the point. Nemesio isn't trying to kill everyone. He's trying to make you recalculate. These aren't gangsters with AKs and trucks anymore. These are tacticians using tools more common in modern war zones than street battles. And El Mencho? He's at the center of it. A rural kingpin with the foresight of a Pentagon planner. Back in Guadalajara, the mood shifts. Even civilians who once tolerated CJNG begin to worry. Drones overhead, new faces in neighborhoods, money flowing too fast to stay unnoticed. One market vendor says, when the cartel has better technology than the army, you stop calling them criminals. You start calling them the government, and maybe that's the point. While rivals try to dominate with volume, Nemesio focuses on structure. Each CJNG cell gets its own accountant, monthly reports, performance metrics. There are even rumors of a benefits package for long-serving members, healthcare and private clinics, death benefits for families, scholarships for children. It sounds absurd, but if true, it reflects something chilling. CJNG isn't a gang anymore. It's a corporation that kills. And Nemesio? He doesn't attend the board meetings. He is the board. One curious story floats up around this time. A local school in rural Jalisco suddenly gets new books, laptops, and a resurfaced soccer field. No one knows who paid. One teacher suspects CJNG. She writes a letter anonymously, thanking whoever helped. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrives at her door with a note. No thanks needed, just teach them to think. Inside is a small stack of pesos, equivalent to 3 months' salary. Many people still think that's just folklore. Others swear it's true. So what do you think? A PR stunt or a genuine attempt to create stability? Meanwhile, the government grows more desperate. Rewards are increased. Properties are seized. Even Nemesio's relatives begin getting picked off, arrested or disappeared. His wife, Rosalinda, is arrested again in a sweeping move meant to shake the foundation. It doesn't work. In fact, it strengthens it. Within weeks, new layers of CJNG's structure emerge. Bank accounts are rerouted. Legal teams appear from nowhere. Lieutenants step in. It's almost like Nemesio anticipated every play. And maybe he did, because by now, he's not just playing a game of survival. He's writing the rule book while everyone else is still learning how to read it. A storm rolls over the mountains of Michoacan, but no one flinches. Out here, thunder is a lesser noise. The people have lived through louder. Automatic gunfire behind the schoolyard, trucks rumbling past midnight, names whispered one day and never again. And somewhere within that storm, El Mencho remains, unseen but understood. It's 2017, and the mythology of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes has surpassed geography. He's become less a man and more a gravitational force. But even gravity must adjust course when too many eyes look upward. This year, Nemesio does something unexpected. He begins removing his own people. It starts with a single name, Ramiro El Maguey. Once a trusted operator in Colima, Ramiro starts pushing his own agenda, expanding into new towns without clearance, recruiting local muscle without proper vetting, making calls on alliances that should go through central command. CJNG isn't like other cartels. It has a memory, and Nemesio remembers everything. So Ramiro is invited to a meeting in Zapopan. Not by Nemesio, of course. By management. He shows up, smiles, laughs, drinks, and never comes home. His car is later found in a garage with keys still in the ignition, phone wiped clean. No message, just an absence. Many people still think El Mencho purged Ramiro because of betrayal. But others, former lieutenants, a handful of journalists, suggest something more deliberate. That Nemesio viewed ambition without discipline as the true virus. So what do you think? Was Ramiro too loud, or just too early? That removal sparks what insiders quietly call the list. It's not written down, not spoken aloud, but it exists in the mind of Nemesio and in the tremble of his lieutenants when they pause mid-sentence. Names start disappearing from operations. Territories get reassigned. A top-level finance manager in Puerto Vallarta vanishes during a fishing trip. His replacement is younger, quieter, and gets audited weekly. CJNG doesn't crumble, it crystallizes. Mainstream historical fact. In 2017, Mexico's federal intelligence began reporting strange patterns. High-ranking CJNG operatives disappearing without police involvement, often just days after internal disputes or financial inconsistencies. Though unverifiable, many of these absences were linked back to internal discipline, not government pressure. And this is where Nemesio's brilliance or madness, depending on who's talking, really shows. He treats trust like currency, not faith, not friendship, just a measurable, exhaustible resource. Use it wisely or be replaced. But while the internal structure tightens, the world outside is spinning faster. U.S. overdose rates spike. The opioid crisis intensifies. Fentanyl becomes the new fear word, and every politician from San Diego to Scranton is demanding answers. Enter CJNG. Their shipments shift. Less focus on meth, more on synthetic opioids. They don't need jungles anymore, just precursors from China, chemists in windowless rooms, and trucks with custom compartments that can pass any inspection. Nemesio doesn't need to push tons across borders. He needs ounces, deadlier, more profitable, harder to trace. DEA analysts begin to notice the pattern. Seizures in Arizona and Texas show a familiar stamp. CJNG's expanding again, but in shadows this time. Not violence, not conquest, just quiet distribution. The kind that keeps funeral homes busier than morgues. And while politicians yell, El Mencho moves his pieces. He sends one of his financial teams to Guadalajara's real estate market. Suddenly, mid-range apartments are being bought in bulk. Cash payments. Holding companies. Some say it's money laundering. Others think it's insulation. Safe houses that look like Airbnbs. A former tenant recalls an apartment he rented with smart locks and 2 refrigerators. The lease was in the name of a blind man from Veracruz who had died 4 years earlier. Even city officials admit CJNG's money isn't flowing, it's settling. Back in Michoacan, small towns remain strangely untouched. There's a rhythm to life. The church bell, the meat truck, the unmarked SUVs idling without comment. Nemesio's influence here isn't loud. It's cultural. Kids wear CJNG hats without irony. Graffiti tags read not Viva Mencho, but Gracias. One mural shows him holding a rosary in one hand, a scale in the other. Some outsiders scoff, call it propaganda. But the locals? They remember who repaired the power lines after the government left them in the dark for weeks. So what do you think? False hero or functional provider? At the same time, rival cartels attempt to poke holes. Sinaloa launches a brief offensive near Manzanillo, hoping to slice a shipping corridor. They even send a few top lieutenants dressed as construction workers to map the port routes. They last 6 days. Their bodies are found in shallow graves, marked with plastic wristbands usually reserved for nightclub entry. It's Nemesio's message. You want in? Try the front door. He never claims responsibility. He never needs to. The government, for its part, keeps the pressure on. But Nemesio stays slippery. His face appears on more posters. The reward jumps to $10 million. Rosalinda, his wife, is arrested again, this time with more evidence. They say he watches the arrest on a laptop in a warehouse 30 miles away. Doesn't speak, doesn't flinch, just lights a cigarette and closes the lid. To his core circle, he says only, if they catch her, they'll think they're close. Then he rewrites 3 routes, reassigns 4 teams, and vanishes again. But it's not just strategy. It's grief, too. His family, once his buffer, is now his liability. His daughter Jessica is under watch. His son-in-law is dead. His own face is now synonymous with terror and lawlessness. And yet, CJNG thrives. Even international markets take notice. In Spain, a string of arrests leads back to Jalisco. In Colombia, a former FARC contact is found wired with CJNG money. They're expanding not like a virus, but like a franchise. Nemesio, the orchard boy, now controls a network that spans continents. But does he sleep? A former bodyguard once whispered to a journalist that Nemesio never rests in the same bed twice, that he travels with a bag of fresh SIM cards and once walked 3 hours in the rain just to avoid a drone sweep. Whether true or not, it sounds like him, because for all his power, for all the billions moved and bodies buried, there's still a part of Nemesio that acts like he's being chased by something bigger, something heavier than justice. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's the boy he left behind in the orchard. But whatever it is, it keeps him walking. The city of Colima wakes to the hiss of tires on wet pavement. It's early 2018, and already the air feels charged, like static before a lightning strike. A police captain, once considered neutral, is found shot 3 times in the chest, seated upright in his patrol car, parked exactly in front of the station. A note is left on the dashboard. Decisions have weight. No signature, no demand, just punctuation. That's how CJNG speaks now. They don't rant on social media or hold press conferences with bloodied captives. They issue silence that feels heavier than screams. And El Mencho, though nowhere near the scene, is the architect of the wait. At this point, 2018, Nemesio is no longer just avoiding arrest. He's outmaneuvering systems. The DEA believes he's in the Sierra de Jalisco, protected by a rolling ring of watchers, farmers, civilians, ex-police. They call it the moving shield. No electronics, no trail, just eyes that warn him days before a helicopter even lifts off. Mainstream historical fact. By 2018, CJNG had expanded into over 24 of Mexico's 32 states. Their logistics were faster, leaner, and more resilient than any cartel before them. Even Sinaloa in its prime. Nemesio doesn't just win wars. He erases them before they're named. He knows what's coming too. International heat, domestic pressure, rumors of splits within his own organization. So what does he do? He tightens further. CJNG begins rotating its leadership model again. Gone are the flashy commanders who leave trails of bodies and Instagram stories. In their place, accountants, school teachers, men who look like they fix roofs on the weekends. Operatives begin traveling with wives and children, not as shields, but as camouflage. You don't suspect the man pushing a stroller of moving 30 kilos of fentanyl. That's Nemesio's genius. He doesn't hide behind people. He hides among them. But not everything is smooth. In Guadalajara, a trusted mid-level enforcer goes rogue, starts selling intel to the military in exchange for protection. For weeks, he leaks movement schedules, safe house locations, even the make and model of Nemesio's preferred SUV. Then one night, that SUV is spotted burned on the edge of the city. No bodies, no blood, just a ring of ash, 3 blackened phones inside, and a tin box buried nearby with the traitor's photo inside it. The message? You can't map a ghost. Many people still think El Mencho overreacted, that the rogue officer was manageable, even usable. But others believe Nemesio doesn't deal in half measures. So what do you think? Was it about security? Or was it a reminder? Because for every silent message, there's a loud one waiting. A few weeks later, a convoy of federal officers disappears en route to Tapalpa. Days later, their bodies appear in what looks like a ritual circle. Hands folded, faces covered, uniforms perfectly cleaned and pressed. No sign of violence, until autopsies show cyanide injections. It's theater, yes, but refined theater. Controlled, designed to disturb, not just destroy. And yet, within his own camp, Nemesio grows quieter. Sources close to him claim he no longer discusses winning. He speaks of legacy, of systems. He asks lieutenants questions like, if I vanish, can it run without me? And, if your child inherits this, will it still work? He's building not just an empire, but a manual. CJNG begins training camps in Guerrero and Nayarit. Not just for shooters, but for logisticians. Recruits study maps, encryption protocols, escape routes. They learn how to build a meth lab and how to cook a meal in under 10 minutes using storm supplies, just in case they're hiding in the mountains for days. There's even rumor of a small booklet, CJNG's Internal Doctrine, 28 pages, handwritten by one of Nemesio's trusted captains. It doesn't preach violence. It outlines efficiency, respect, the importance of silence. One page allegedly reads, "We do not strike to show power. We strike to remove confusion." By now, international agencies are baffled. Sinaloa still draws attention. El Chapo's sons are loud, media-ready, and full of cinematic swagger. But CJNG? They're a whisper behind your curtain. And when you pull it back, there's nothing there. But the economy tells the truth. Throughout 2018, real estate in Jalisco booms for no reason. ATMs in rural towns never seem to run dry. Small clinics pop up offering surprisingly advanced care. And in cities like Colima and Morelia, CJNG begins quietly acquiring debt from struggling businesses, buying not land, but loyalty. Imagine this. A bakery owner falls behind on rent. A man shows up, pays it in full, and hands the owner a phone number. "If anyone bothers you, call this." The baker never hears from the man again. But each morning, fresh flour is delivered before sunrise. Is it extortion? Is it patronage? Or has CJNG begun testing something bolder? Parallel governance. A political science professor in Mexico City writes a paper titled "Cartel Federalism When Crime Becomes Infrastructure." It's dismissed as alarmist, but within CJNG circles, the phrase becomes a joke and a blueprint. Meanwhile, Nemesio's own family continues walking the tightrope. His daughter, Jessica, rumored to be running part of the financial arm, moves quietly through legitimate businesses, construction firms, real estate groups, even an avocado export company. U.S. authorities freeze accounts, issue warrants, try to connect the dots. But every time they catch a lead, the paper trail goes cold under a name like A. Dominguez or Farmacia's Jalisco Holdings. It's like chasing smoke through a maze. Even Rosalinda, after multiple arrests, seems to vanish. House arrest turns into court delays. And eventually, she's unavailable for questioning. And Nemesio, he remains a ghost. Some say he lives in the mountains, eating simple food and sleeping in boots. Others believe he's gone full subterranean, bunkers lined with LED lights and oxygen tanks. But one rumor gains traction. A source from inside the Mexican Navy claims Nemesio has a surgical team on standby, ready to alter his appearance at a moment's notice. The story goes that he once had a mole removed, altered his teeth, and even adjusted his voice with therapy to avoid voice print recognition. Many people still think it's paranoia, but what if it's rehearsal? What if Nemesio's building not just an escape plan, but a replacement? Because power, in its most refined form, doesn't need a name, just a rhythm. And CJNG by now doesn't pulse like a gang. It breathes like a government. The roosters still crow in Aguililla. The hills roll like sleeping giants, and in the early morning haze, nothing seems urgent. But beneath the silence, something stirs. A presence, persistent and ghost-like. It's said that Nemesio once passed through these hills dressed as a farmer, a bag of fertilizer in one hand, a satellite phone in the other. He stopped, nodded to an old man, and said, "It's always the soil that decides who stays." It's now 2019, and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has moved from legend to law. Its influence isn't loud anymore. It's systemic. You can't point to where it starts because it's everywhere. It funds construction. It issues consequences. It repairs potholes faster than the state. And El Mencho? He's not stepping out from the shadows. He's sinking deeper into them. This is the year he becomes El Señor de los Gallos, the Lord of the Roosters. It starts with an invitation-only cockfighting tournament, hosted somewhere in the countryside of Jalisco. Nobody admits who organized it, but the attendees know. You don't get an invitation unless you've proved useful, or dangerous, or both. There are no phones allowed, no recordings. The rules are whispered over tamales and tequila. And among the usual banter of bets and blood, a name circulates. Él está aquí. They say Nemesio himself is watching from a shaded balcony, not in a suit, not in gold, just a plain white shirt, cowboy hat tilted low, and the stillness of someone who's not hoping to be missed, just planning not to be seen. This isn't about birds. It's about positioning. Several rival mid-level operatives are in attendance, some from Tijuana, others from Durango. They eat, they cheer, they lose. And when they leave, they each find a folded envelope in their car. Inside, a photo of themselves, taken from a slight angle. Not threatening, just aware. That's how Nemesio negotiates, with optics, mainstream historical fact. In 2019, the DEA declared CJNG the most dangerous cartel operating in the Western Hemisphere. Their report outlined global distribution lines, sophisticated financial laundering, and an unprecedented use of military tactics in civilian areas. And yet, the man behind it all remains. Unphotographed since 2016, unverified in every new sighting, his most recent confirmed image being a mugshot taken decades prior, a criminal empire powered by a rumor. But what do rumors feed on? Fear and precision. CJNG's internal policies now mimic those of major intelligence agencies. New recruits are vetted via family histories. Members are relocated with their families not for protection, but for accountability. A brother's betrayal becomes the whole household's problem. It's ruthless, but it's not sloppy. One story, shared in hushed tones among logistics teams, tells of a chemist in Nayarit caught skimming profits. He confesses, terrified, expecting execution. Instead, Nemesio orders him transferred to accounting. If he knows numbers better than loyalty, he says, let's use his numbers. Many people still think this was a mercy, but others believe it was a warning. You live, but you're mine now. So what do you think? Was that leniency or life on a leash? Meanwhile, in Guadalajara, federal raids intensify. Warehouses are seized. Cash is uncovered by the millions. And then, nothing. No arrests, no real intel. Every location seems abandoned hours before the hit, as if someone is watching the watchers. Some believe CJNG has access to government schedules, leaked by low-paid clerks or desperate officials. But others say Nemesio doesn't need leaks. He just knows how the game is played. He once told a lieutenant, everyone has a routine, even chaos. And that's where his power lies, not just in violence, but in pattern recognition. His agents study travel logs, weather reports, logistics flow. They predict supply disruptions before the military does. One former CJNG associate, now in witness protection, said he could tell you what time the helicopter would refuel just based on how hot the day was. This isn't criminal enterprise, it's orchestration. And yet, amid all this, Nemesio still returns, occasionally, briefly, quietly, to his roosters. The cockfighting arenas aren't for glory. They're conference rooms. Blood-spattered, yes, but effective. No phones, no microphones, just eyes and consequences. One arena, tucked behind a mango orchard in Michoacan, is rumored to host quarterly gatherings. Not of killers, but of facilitators. Lawyers, brokers, mayors, priests. Yes, priests, because in many towns, the church is still where deals are sealed. Not the confession booth, the kitchen, and the irony? Nemesio, despite all, is still deeply religious. Crosses hang in every safe house. He keeps a St. Jude card in his wallet. Before each major operation, he reportedly fasts for a day, not out of fear, but reverence. That contradiction defines him. He funds schools and disappears teachers. He reads the Bible and orders shipments of synthetic opioids that will kill thousands. He prays and he punishes. So what do you think? Hypocrisy or hierarchy? Back in the cities, CJNG begins outsourcing more. Smaller gangs are hired as subcontractors. Not everyone gets the full uniform anymore. Sometimes loyalty is rented, but El Mencho keeps his circle tight. It's said that by this point, he only speaks regularly with 7 people, all of whom are unrelated, all of whom speak in code. Some conversations are held face-to-face, others through signals, objects, even shortwave radios masked as children's toys. In one town, a toy truck appears in a grocery store window. The wheels are painted red. That night, a convoy reroutes. It sounds insane. But in Nemesio's world, insane is secure. And even as the DEA tightens its grip, as Mexican Marines ramp up pressure, as narco hunters set traps across 3 states, he drifts past them like fog, still here, still watching, still feeding his roosters. The wind shifts in Zapopan. It's subtle, just a cooler breeze through the jacaranda trees, the kind that makes security cameras shudder and birds fall suddenly silent. It's 2020 now, and the quiet has teeth. At a gated estate outside the city, a local businessman cancels a meeting. Something about the air feels wrong. An hour later, that same estate is stormed, not by police, but by masked men in civilian clothing. No bodies, no blood, just an empty property and a van full of confiscated laptops, driven away with government plates that no agency will admit to authorizing. In the war for Mexico's underworld, CJNG now holds the playbook, and Nemesio, still invisible, writes in the margins. He isn't running anymore. He's waiting. This is the year his personal myth crosses borders. In Los Angeles, a federal prosecutor gives an interview on camera, declaring Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes the single most powerful criminal in the Western Hemisphere. It's the kind of title most men would crave. Nemesio? He seems amused, because with that sentence, the pressure intensifies, but so does the confusion. The more famous he becomes, the harder it is to know what's real. U.S. intelligence reports conflict. Some claim he's living in a mobile bunker somewhere near Tepalcatepec. Others suggest he's had surgery and now moves through Guatemala disguised as a merchant. One even posits that he's fled to Thailand, running heroin corridors with a new identity. But the truth may be simpler. He's exactly where he's always been, in the folds of Mexico's forgotten villages, hidden not by distance, but by loyalty. Mainstream historical fact. In early 2020, Nemesio's son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, nicknamed El Menchito, was extradited to the United States. The move was considered a major strike against CJNG, with hopes that Ruben's testimony would unravel operations from within. It didn't. If anything, it proved Nemesio's system could survive personal loss. El Menchito had long been groomed a successor. Fluent in English, smart, calculating. But in the years leading up to his extradition, Nemesio had already diversified leadership. Ruben's removal stung, but it didn't cripple. CJNG didn't flinch. And Nemesio? He barely responded. When reporters asked Mexican authorities if they believed El Mencho would retaliate, one official said, "If he does, it won't be loud, and it won't be traceable." That same week, 2 low-level informants tied to the extradition were found dead in separate states. Neither death was ruled a homicide. Both were quietly cremated before paperwork finalized. Coincidence? Maybe. But Nemesio doesn't rely on coincidences, he crafts them. By this time, his internal doctrine shifts once again. CJNG begins discouraging flashy murders. No more hanging bodies from bridges, no more narco banners dripping in threats. Instead, there's a return to clean violence, quiet, precise, and almost polite. If a message must be sent, it arrives folded into a napkin. If a rival must be erased, it happens in a crowd, and no one notices. This isn't softness, it's evolution. CJNG's business arm begins expanding. More avocado farms, more mining interests, more shell companies buying medical supplies and concrete, construction sites with no construction, clinics with no doctors. One facility in Querétaro is raided in March. Inside, 2 nurses, a half-stocked pharmacy, and 25 hard drives encrypted with biometric locks. The nurses don't speak. The hard drives remain untouched. To the public, it's a failed raid. To CJNG, it's proof of concept. The vault holds, even when the door is opened. And somewhere in the mountains of Michoacán, Nemesio eats quietly beside a wood stove, sipping tea sweetened with lime and honey. The room has no phone, no electricity, just a hand-drawn map of 5 states and a chessboard missing its queen. He's said to look older now, grayer, thinner, but his mind is sharper. One of his cooks once said, he can hear the difference between a safe knock and a dead one. This year, Nemesio becomes obsessed with leverage, not the brute kind, the quiet kind. He starts requesting files, property records, bank debt ledgers, family trees of local prosecutors, not to use yet, just to know. Because knowing is power. Using it is a last resort. Many people still think El Mencho seeks dominance, but what if he only seeks options? So what do you think? Does he gather information to act, or simply to breathe easier? CJNG's reach deepens in the Pacific ports. Manzanillo becomes more than a shipment hub. It becomes a test lab for customs manipulation. Shipments from China marked as mechanical parts arrive weekly. Inside, pill presses, precursor chemicals, counterfeit barcode scanners, and for every intercepted crate, 2 more make it through. CJNG's engineers begin experimenting with drone-to-boat transfers. One test uses a fishing trawler in the Sea of Cortez. A drone lifts a 5-kilo payload from a yacht to the beach without touching any dock. The future isn't coming. It's already operational. And in the cities, civilians begin to notice small shifts. Gas stations with free air stations that only activate with encrypted codes. Pharmacies offering medicine at 1/3 of market cost. Schools with new roofs, no donor named. A growing number of youths with no known jobs driving brand new cars. The government tries to respond. More arrests, more press conferences, more photos in front of seized vehicles, but nothing sticks. The arrests, mid-level. The seizures, written off as operational costs. The kingpin, still invisible. By fall, a new theory emerges from a former intelligence officer. El Mencho's greatest trick is not hiding from us. It's making us believe he's still a man, because maybe he's not anymore. Maybe he's a code, a doctrine, a set of rules enforced by people who've never met him, but believe in what he's built. A soldier in Veracruz says, "We've never seen him, but everything we do like he's watching." That's not fear, that's faith. And when an empire runs on faith, the leader doesn't need to show up, just exist, just like the wind through the trees, just like the roosters in the dark. The sun rises sluggishly over Tepalcatepec, painting the hills gold with a brush dipped in dust. Roosters crow. Radios crackle with norteño ballads. On the surface, it's just another morning. But underneath, something tighter coils into the rhythm of the town. Doors open slower. Neighbors glance twice. There's a sense that something is about to shift. It's early 2021, and CJNG has never been bigger, stronger, or more hunted. At this stage, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes no longer runs his empire from the center. He runs it from the edges, orbiting the machinery like a satellite, silent, consistent, always watching. He doesn't bark orders down a chain of command. He moves through signals, pressure, and momentum. His lieutenants call it El Pulso, the pulse. But as his structure grows more sophisticated, the threats grow more personal. His daughter, Jessica Johanna, is arrested in Washington, D.C., on charges related to CJNG's financial network. The indictment describes her as a key laundering operative, involved in funneling millions through shell companies. Mainstream historical fact. In March 2020, Jessica Oseguera was arrested by U.S. authorities while attempting to attend her brother's court hearing. She was later sentenced to 30 months in prison. Her arrest represented one of the rare instances of the U.S. directly touching Nemesio's bloodline. To Nemesio, it's a message. Not to weaken him, but to lure him. They know he values family. They've seen it before, but he doesn't react in the way authorities hope. No brash retaliation, no spike in violence, just stillness. For months, until one day, a DEA safe house in Mexico experiences a security breach. No one is hurt. Nothing is stolen. But all the locks are changed, the surveillance corrupted, and a single sticky note is found on the kitchen counter. Keep your hands out of my house. Fingerprints? None. Many people still think that note was a bluff, a hoax planted by rogue elements. But others, especially those who've studied Nemesio's patterns, believe it was a gift. So what do you think? Was it a threat or a declaration of control? Meanwhile, CJNG's external footprint continues to grow in ways few predicted. In Europe, coordinated investigations in Spain and the Netherlands begin uncovering hints of CJNG presence, specifically in logistics and synthetic drug flow. One seizure of pink fentanyl pills in Barcelona is traced to a Guadalajara lab via packaging fibers. This isn't coincidence, it's expansion. Nemesio's organization doesn't just traffic narcotics. It moves product like Amazon, through layers of handlers, blind shippers, shell invoices, and front companies so bland they'd make your eyes glaze over. One U.S. Customs officer remarked, "I've seen avocado shipments with more digital security than some military transports." Back in Mexico, his control grows subtler. The local elections of 2021 see a surge in CJNG's influence, not through candidates, but through reminders. In Michoacan, candidates who refuse to play ball receive quiet visits. A note, a broken window. A neighbor disappears for 24 hours and returns unharmed, just shaken. The message: we don't want to replace your vote. We want you to remember we exist. And in many towns, that's enough. The ballots tilt, the outcomes lean, and nobody files a complaint. Meanwhile, in Guadalajara, CJNG launches something unexpected, a recruitment wave. Flyers appear overnight at tech universities and trade schools, offering security consultant positions, logistics analysis internships, and drone coordination contracts. The contact information is encrypted, the interviews discreet. Most applicants never hear back, but those who do disappear for weeks and return with cleaner shoes, more confidence, and fewer questions. CJNG isn't hiring soldiers. It's hiring systems thinkers. Nemesio doesn't need more guns. He needs minds, because he knows the war of the future won't be fought with bullets. It will be logistical, algorithmic, and unseen. At one safe house in Colima, a room is discovered during a failed raid, lined with whiteboards, graphs, and pinned photos of border agents, their routes, shift changes, and known relatives. The agents back off. quietly, because when you stare too long at the abyss files a report. But El Mencho doesn't revel in this power. Not publicly. His communications remain as minimal as ever. Rare handwritten notes, shortwave radio pulses, verbal messages relayed by trusted couriers who never carry phones. He no longer visits cockfights. He no longer appears even at his own weddings or baptisms. The man who once showed up in cowboy boots to tip taco vendors now lives inside protocol. Even his closest inner circle follows what they call la regla del humo, the smoke rule. You never see him. You just know he's there. So how do you fight a man you can't confirm is alive? One theory begins circulating quietly, carefully among foreign agencies, that Nemesio has already passed control to someone else. That he's either terminally ill or retired deep into the mountains under a new identity. Some even suggest he faked a final disappearance, becoming the myth he always preferred over the man. A whisper spreads. El Mencho is now a philosophy. Still, operations continue, better than ever, faster, leaner. CJNG adapts quickly to COVID-era logistics. With closed borders and new scrutiny, they pivot to using e-commerce-style routes, smaller shipments, frequent drops, encrypted QR codes, and local delivery drivers who don't even know what's in their trunk. One former driver testified anonymously, "I thought I was delivering vitamins. It was easier than Uber." By winter, the government renews its effort to capture him. New bounties, satellite sweeps, pressure on suspected allies. But Nemesio does something unusual. He lets a rumor slip that he's negotiating with the government, that he's considering surrender if conditions are met. It's bait, obviously, but it works. Media explodes. Every intelligence agency reassigns resources. CJNG halts operations for 48 hours. Nothing happens. The rumor fades, but in that window, 5 high-risk operatives vanish. A lab is relocated, and a shipment of $100 million worth of precursor chemicals crosses the border unchallenged. Sometimes, you don't need to move. You just need the world to think you're about to. Many people still think that moment was a test, that Nemesio was checking the temperature of the waters. So what do you think? Was he truly flirting with surrender? Or just flipping the board for a better play? Because by now, even silence obeys his tempo. A January dusk settles over the Sierra de Jalisco, bleeding gold into the trees, and the wind, sharp but slow, whispers through pine like a voice from a memory. Somewhere in that highland hush, a convoy winds up a dirt trail. No markings, no headlights, only dust. The last truck in line pauses longer than the others. Inside, no weapons, just 2 laptop bags, a child's drawing pinned to the dashboard, and a folded flannel shirt still warm from its owner. They say El Mencho is inside one of those trucks. They always say that, but no one ever knows for sure. It's now 2022, and Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes has become the uncatchable echo of Mexico's underworld. He doesn't answer to his name anymore. In fact, he rarely uses names at all. Just codes, just rhythm. His lieutenants say he communicates like the tide, regular, invisible, and capable of flooding you when ignored. CJNG by now isn't merely a cartel. It's a distributed network with a nervous system. Information pulses from Baja to Chiapas in less time than a press release. Each node, each operator, is trained not to seek orders, but to read conditions. They don't wait for instruction. They interpret momentum, and the man who designed it, he's harder to find than ever. Mainstream historical fact. In 2022, U.S. and Mexican officials confirmed that Nemesio was suffering from significant health issues, including reported kidney problems. Some believed this would weaken his leadership. Others feared it would accelerate CJNG's decentralization. Both were right. CJNG doesn't slow. It splinters, with purpose. Subcells across Michoacán, Colima, Nayarit, Zacatecas, and Guanajuato begin operating semi-independently. Not rogue, just modular. It's the cartel version of cloud computing. No single failure can crash the system, and Nemesio, still alive, still watching, begins pulling back further. More layers between him and operations. More misinformation leaked into intelligence circles. At one point, 3 confirmed sightings occur, simultaneously, in 3 different states. Same build, same mannerisms, same tattoos. Coincidence? Probably not. Many people still think he trained body doubles for this exact purpose. So what do you think? Is the real Nemesio still moving? Or already parked? Back in Michoacán, the ground itself starts reacting. Armed self-defense groups, autodefensas, begin reappearing. Some claim independence. Others, quiet ties to CJNG rivals like Sinaloa. In the chaos, CJNG responds like it always has. Not with speeches, but with geometry. They surround towns, not with bullets, but with access control. Roads are monitored, fuel shipments diverted. Grocers warned, deliver only what's approved. Churches, left untouched. But anyone with a walkie-talkie and an opinion disappears. Still, Nemesio orders restraint, not out of mercy, out of patience. He's playing the longer game. In the cities, CJNG continues shaping life through discreet pressure. A journalist in Guadalajara gets a call at 3 a.m. Not a threat, just a soft male voice saying, the article's tone was unbalanced. Reconsider the framing. Then a click. The journalist rewrites the piece. Not because he was told, because he was reminded. That's how Nemesio works now. Not through direct orders, but through correctional gravity. Like orbit. You may not see the force, but you feel it if you drift. His network of watchers grows. They aren't hitmen. They're couriers, teachers, farmers, midwives. People you'd never suspect until they recite a license plate they weren't supposed to know. In Chiapas, a medical clinic receives a shipment of painkillers hours after reporting a shortage. The staff doesn't ask questions, just places the boxes neatly on the shelves. A note arrives 2 days later. Do good. Keep quiet. It's unclear if Nemesio sent it himself. But in his world, that's not the point. What matters is that the system functions, with or without him. And this system, disturbingly, begins competing with the state. Local governments struggle with fuel shortages. CJNG brings gasoline in drums, sells it at a fixed rate, cheaper than market. The military tries to repair bridges after a storm. CJNG repairs 5 before they even begin. In Veracruz, a town's mayor resigns, citing loss of authority. No further explanation. People start calling CJNG the other government. Not sarcastically, just practically. So what do you think? Is that power, or just problem solving with better branding? Meanwhile, international pressure grows. The DEA increases surveillance. Joint task forces share intel. U.S. senators begin demanding direct drone strikes. And yet, every time a plan nears execution, CJNG shifts. Locations change. Dates move. Targets disappear. One captured courier tells investigators, "We get new instructions just before sleep. On the wall, written in pencil. Every morning, they're erased. How do you intercept a message that self-destructs in routine?" Nemesio's network relies not on firewalls, but on behavioral encryption. Routes change, protocols rotate, even hand signals get switched weekly. He doesn't just hide his movements, he shuffles the entire rhythm around them. Back in Aguililla, his birthplace, rumors persist of his occasional return. A grocer swears he once saw Nemesio buy a lime soda and leave 200 pesos without speaking. A farmer claims he lent his donkey to a tired stranger who fixed the fence and left a bag of rice in return. Is it myth? Maybe. But when the myth fixes your fence, you start calling it real. And perhaps that's the real shift. CJNG isn't just an organization anymore. It's a condition, like weather or fog, or the feeling that someone's watching even when you're alone. One human rights worker visiting Michoacan puts it this way: there's no announcement, just a tension that settles over the town like morning dew. And somewhere, Nemesio breathes easier, not because he's safe, but because the system is. He's built something that no longer requires his hands, only his name. And even that is optional, because by now El Mencho isn't a man, he's momentum. The year is sliding into summer, and the heat in Guadalajara isn't just weather, it's pressure. The government's watching, the journalists are guessing, the people are adapting. But somewhere in the noise, CJNG keeps humming, unshaken, predictable only in its resilience, and in the background, one name still holds everything in place: Nemesio. He hasn't been seen publicly in years. His voice hasn't been recorded in even longer. Yet every action taken within CJNG still loops back to him, like he's a silent conductor, shaping a violent symphony without lifting a baton. One former operative, now exiled and anonymous, said it best: "You don't wait for his voice. You feel it, like a change in the weather." By now, El Mencho has entered his purest form of control: indirect presence. He no longer gives direct orders. He drafts frameworks, guidelines, reaction thresholds. His men are expected not to ask, but to calculate, not to check in, but to interpret. CJNG runs like an algorithm now, and Nemesio is the original line of code. This year, the organization doubles down on financial operations. New entities pop up: logistics firms, water purification startups, agricultural co-ops with immaculate books and vague missions. Some are staffed with real employees who think they're part of an eco-initiative. Others are paper-thin, designed to route money through 3 countries in 12 hours. Mainstream historical fact: in 2022-2023, the U.S. Department of the Treasury sanctioned over 40 individuals and entities tied to CJNG's financial networks, citing their ability to operate more like multinational corporations than drug trafficking rings. And still, most of those entities vanished before a single arrest. Like footprints in dry sand the moment the wind changes. So how do they move the money? Simple. They don't. They split it. One business sells tortillas to hospitals, but the corn is subsidized by another business registered as a fuel supplier. The fuel supplier receives investment from a cultural arts nonprofit in Oaxaca. That nonprofit receives donations from a mining consultancy registered in Canada. None of it makes sense, which is why it works. Nemesio doesn't hoard cash in one place. He atomizes it, breaks it apart like dust in a sunbeam, every particle floating, uncatchable, necessary. He once told an advisor, "You don't bury treasure anymore, you plant it." Back in Michoacan, the towns don't see spreadsheets. They see results: new water tanks, school books, roads resurfaced faster than local officials can file permits. And yes, silence where violence used to be loud. In one town, a local baseball team receives uniforms with no sponsor logo, just a single stitched letter, J. No one asks what it stands for. Everyone already knows. Even law enforcement begins to fold. Officers aren't threatened, they're outperformed. CJNG tip-offs arrive hours before federal alerts. Criminals are handed over to authorities prepackaged, with a quiet suggestion to stop asking how they were caught. One commander in Jalisco receives an envelope with a list of names, dates, and a short note. "You're doing well. Let's not change that." He retires within the month. Many people still think CJNG's greatest weapon is violence, but maybe it's usefulness. So what do you think? Are the authorities losing the war, or just adapting to a new partner? In places like Colima and Guanajuato, the distinction grows blurrier. CJNG deploys cleaners, teams not to enforce turf, but to stabilize it. If a rival group burns a block, CJNG sends in builders, not bombers. New wiring, new windows, quiet apologies wrapped in efficiency. Their motto becomes, "If it breaks, fix it before it makes noise." Meanwhile, Nemesio continues pulling back. He no longer travels in convoys. Instead, he moves in fragments. One week, a footprint outside a safe house matches his. The next, a used toothbrush surfaces in a home recently raided. A bakery owner claims he saw a man matching his description, buying pineapple empanadas. But the surveillance footage is mysteriously corrupted. It's like chasing a rumor with a passport. A drone flies over Aguililla, picks up thermal imaging, movement. But by the time boots arrive on the ground, the entire site is abandoned, swept, wiped, bleached. All that remains is a single boot print, deep, deliberate, facing the trees. The press speculates wildly. Is this proof of life? But Nemesio doesn't offer proof. He offers rhythm, because to him, the greatest act of control isn't capture, it's misdirection. Back in Mexico City, government strategists begin theorizing. What if Nemesio is slowly dissolving himself, not in death, in structure? What if he's preparing CJNG to operate leaderless, a hive mind, sustained by doctrine, muscle memory, and quiet fear? One analyst calls it the decentralization gambit. Another calls it succession without a face. And a third simply shrugs and says, he's turning into a shadow that casts shadows. The question no one can answer is, why now? Health? Maybe. Age? Perhaps. But some believe it's evolution. That Nemesio sees the future more clearly than his enemies, because the next frontier of power won't be who runs the cartel. It'll be who owns the system when the cartel no longer needs to exist. CJNG is already in avocados, mining, real estate, pharmaceuticals, logistics, and fintech. All registered, all scalable, all quiet. And what if, when the pressure becomes too great, the drugs stop flowing, but the companies stay? What if El Mencho doesn't retire? He rebrands. It's a theory. But in Nemesio's world, theories tend to become policies. And when your legacy is function, not fame, you don't need a monument. You just need to be remembered as the man who never got caught. The rain comes softly to Tepic, curling around street lamps and pooling along sidewalks like secrets. In a small cafe just off the plaza, an older man sips his espresso and watches the street with eyes that know too much. He once worked logistics for a shipping company. He now operates consulting services for private farms that don't advertise. And if you ask the right way, he'll tell you that El Mencho's greatest weapon isn't force. It's the illusion of absence. It's 2023, and the illusion is nearly complete. CJNG still moves product, fentanyl, meth, and more, but the focus has shifted. Nemesio's machine is now deep into integration, not just smuggling through companies, but becoming them. Gone are the days of fake front operations barely masking their intent. Now, the businesses are real. The revenue is real. The influence is real. And at the center of that swirling gray space between legal and criminal sites an empire with no face, mainstream historical fact. In 2023, U.S. and Mexican authorities jointly announced sanctions against multiple real estate and agricultural companies operating in Jalisco and Michoacan, citing direct ties to CJNG. But investigators admitted many of these firms were also conducting legitimate business, employing hundreds, paying taxes, and funding local infrastructure. That's not a loophole, that's design. Nemesio doesn't want to hide. He wants to blend. A new theory spreads quietly among cartel analysts. CJNG isn't just laundering money, it's laundering perception. Example, a university in Colima receives a scholarship fund from a regional NGO with no public donor. Local press celebrates it as a charitable boost for low-income students. But the NGO is linked, 6 layers deep, to a CJNG-controlled holding company registered in Panama. A win for education, a mystery to audit. No murders, no messages, just math. Meanwhile, the man himself continues to fade. Confirmed sightings? 0. Recorded conversations? None. The last photo suspected to be him is a blurry security capture from a toll booth in Nayarit. It shows a man in a beige jacket, face half turned, holding a cup of coffee. Could be him. Could be anyone. So where is Nemesio? Some say he's in Chiapas, hidden among coffee plantations under the care of a loyal family. Others say he's living in Guatemala, near the highlands, traveling only by horseback and changing phones daily. But the most compelling theory? That he never left Jalisco, that he remains just miles from the orchards he once picked fruit in tunnels, in ghost houses, surrounded by people who'd sooner cut out their own tongues than speak his name. Many people still think the authorities don't try hard enough to find him. But what if they've already found him and are simply afraid of what happens next? Because Nemesio isn't just a man. He's a systemic risk. The collapse of CJNG wouldn't just cause violence. It would create economic voids, power vacuums, public unrest in towns that rely on his infrastructure more than the government's. So what do you think? Has the state allowed his myth to persist because the alternative is worse? In this fog of half-truths and whispered movements, CJNG innovates again. They start offering digital services, payment apps, crypto wallets, loyalty programs that mimic retail incentives, discounts for early delivery, bonuses for consistency, penalties for questions. One encrypted platform, nicknamed L-App, is rumored to track shipments, assign tasks, and transfer funds via QR codes. It's said to have a feedback system for performance reviews, like Uber, but for drug logistics. A truck driver intercepted in Zacatecas hands over a burner phone. Investigators find a full dashboard of metrics, delivery routes, timestamps, and a 5-star rating from his handler. CJNG doesn't just employ people, it gamifies them. At the heart of it all still is Nemesio. Or maybe not him anymore. Maybe just his playbook. He once told an associate, "If the hand is too obvious, cut it off and teach the wrist." In his absence, his influence only grows. Young traffickers across Latin America now study CJNG's methods like doctrine. Gangs in Ecuador and Chile mimic their decentralized cell structure. Cartels in Colombia adopt their digital anonymity practices. Even Eastern European groups reportedly study their logistics protocols. It's no longer about dominance. It's about franchising. And yet, for all the reach, Nemesio still haunts his homeland. In Aguililla, the houses are quiet. Roads are intact. Children play beneath murals that don't show saints, but sunrises, roosters, and shadowed silhouettes. People say things like, "He took care of our own," or, "At least with him, we knew who to fear." That's legacy. And still, no one knows where he is. A new rumor spreads, this time from inside a prison. An inmate claims he spoke to a man with eyes like the sea and a voice like glass. The man shared advice on patience, said nothing about drugs, and gave him a small folded prayer card before vanishing during head count. The card, St. Jude, patron saint of lost causes. Is it fantasy? Probably. But CJNG doesn't care, because every new myth keeps the real man safer, and every whisper of his presence tightens the silence. El Mencho doesn't knock anymore. He doesn't even approach. He simply rearranges the room from a distance. A mist rolls in over the mountains of Michoacan, not thick enough to hide in, but just dense enough to blur edges. A fitting metaphor for the man whose name, by now, feels more like a suggestion than a fact. It's late 2023. In most of Mexico, there's an uneasy calm, not the kind born of peace, but the kind that hums just before a machine begins spinning again. The violence has quieted, not stopped. The money has grown, not slowed. And Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, he's either watching from very near or not at all. CJNG is now more than an empire. It's a belief system wrapped in logistics, and at its center still are the roosters. Yes, roosters. Despite everything, the technology, the global reach, the criminal innovation, Nemesio still clings to the old rituals. The fighting birds remain in his orbit, though no one sees him at the rings anymore. Still, they say his favorite bloodline, the Colima Reds, are bred in secrecy. Their bloodlines tracked more closely than any of his couriers, not because he profits from them, because they remind him where this all began. A young boy, a fruit truck, a dirt road, and a world that wasn't going to offer anything unless he took it. Mainstream historical fact. As of late 2023, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes remains the most wanted cartel figure by both Mexican and U.S. authorities. Despite record-breaking rewards, multi-agency task forces, and international coordination, he has not been captured. His continued freedom remains one of the most confounding failures of modern drug enforcement. Many people still think he's protected. Others believe he's gone. But every so often something happens, something so precise, so signature, that it feels like a breath from him has passed across the surface of things. Like when 5 officials in Mexico's National Customs Agency resign within 48 hours of each other. One after receiving an anonymous USB drive with encrypted footage of his summer home in Nayarit. Or when a judge's son, studying abroad in Paris, receives a scholarship from a foundation that doesn't technically exist, yet deposits a year's tuition exactly 2 days before his father rules on a CJNG-related asset forfeiture case. The message? He's not gone. He's just reframing the lens. Meanwhile, the CJNG brand evolves once more. In rural Guerrero, local farmers begin receiving financial aid, not from the government, but from a community resilience fund linked to a consortium of agricultural co-ops. It pays for damaged equipment. It funds storm cleanup. It asks no questions, no logos, no thank you banners, just quiet support. And the result? Loyalty not out of fear, but out of habit. That's the final layer of Nemesio's architecture. Normalize the presence until questioning it becomes impolite. In Colima, a bakery displays a photo of a little girl holding her birthday cake, which was donated by friends of the community. No names. But the cake came with 6 sparklers and a sealed envelope containing a receipt with no charges. In Tepic, a power outage lasts 72 hours. But on day 3, a fleet of trucks shows up, not from the electric company, but from a logistics firm that doesn't appear in any registry. The grid is restored in hours. The trucks vanish. So what do you think? Is this just shadow charity or state substitution? CJNG now runs like a ghost government, offering services faster than bureaucracy can respond, and punishing with more consistency than any legal system dares. And somewhere, deep in the folds of that mist, maybe watching from behind a cracked window, or maybe already long gone, is the man who designed it all. His closest allies no longer see him. They see his templates. Even his inner circle refers to him less by name and more by signal. A rooster feather left on a table, a stack of unpaid bills settled overnight, a route suggestion scribbled on the back of a gas receipt. There is no central command, only imitation of a man no one sees. And perhaps that's the point. The more people guess, the more they obey. The more they search, the more he shapes their direction. Nemesio isn't avoiding capture. He's inverting it, turning the spotlight into a flashlight he controls from the shadows. There's a legend, one too romantic to be true, but too specific to ignore, that Nemesio once sat in the back of a church during a wedding officiated by a priest he'd once protected. No guards, no guns, just him and a single yellow rose in his hand. He left before the bride walked the aisle, and when the priest later found the rose on his pulpit, he said nothing to anyone. But he never stopped locking the church doors at dusk. So here we are, 15 sections into a story that has no real ending. A life without a confirmed death. A man whose movements are now just patterns in the fog. And maybe that's where we leave you for tonight. Drifting gently with the last ripple of a myth that's still breathing, still building, still ducking beneath the radar we trust far too much. The night in Puerto Vallarta is warm, still, and just noisy enough to feel safe. Tourists drift in and out of beachfront bars. Music leaks from patios. Somewhere near the marina, an SUV with tinted windows rolls past a valet stand without slowing down. No one looks inside. No one wants to. The illusion of peace is profitable here, and Nemesio has always known that illusion, when properly financed, is the most stable investment. It's now early 2024, and CJNG is operating at full maturity. No longer aggressive in its expansion, but methodical, patient. In fact, its silence now feels louder than ever. The cartel's operations aren't just ongoing, they're calibrated. This is the era of covert optimization. Fewer public executions, more acquisitions, fewer street-level skirmishes, more political leverage. The system is functioning without Nemesio's visible hand, but it bears his fingerprints on every dial. Mainstream historical fact. By 2024, authorities report that CJNG's strongest zones of influence, Jalisco, Colima, Michoacán, have seen fewer headline-making conflicts, yet are more deeply embedded in local governance and economic activity than ever before. Their violence has shifted from spectacle to silence. In short, they've stopped broadcasting and started managing. Behind this calm, Nemesio's inner circle evolves. New names emerge, never confirmed, always whispered, known only by initials, habits, and their role in maintaining continuity. There's L, who oversees internal audits across subcells, more accountant than criminal. There's El Calado, a former lieutenant now responsible for psychological evaluations of new operatives. And then there's the youngest one, called El Lector, rumored to manage the AI-backed comms encryption platform used to coordinate dozens of safe houses across 3 states. No one speaks to Nemesio directly anymore, but his preferences, they are known. No red ink in reports, no repeat routes for shipments, no music during meetings. Simple rules, all followed religiously, because in this ecosystem, compliance is survival. Yet even as his organization tightens, the world outside begins to press in. The DEA, now heavily invested in behavioral mapping, releases a profile on Nemesio. It describes him as a silent strategist driven by ritual, not impulse. They classify his influence as pervasive, but non-linear, a phrase lifted straight from counterterrorism playbooks. This profile never reaches public channels. It's leaked, quietly, and within a week of its leak, a known intelligence contractor in Tijuana resigns and moves to Belize. Coincidence? Probably not. CJNG's surveillance wing has grown remarkably sophisticated. While they avoid satellites and large-scale digital surveillance, they dominate ground-level information flow. Local gas station attendants, phone repair shop owners, municipal janitors, they all form threads in a net that stretches across the country. Need to know when a military official is driving south? Ask the mechanic who replaced his radiator. Need to intercept a courier before he turns state witness? Check who last delivered water to his mother's house. This is Nemesio's strategy. Don't control the data. Control the people who touch it. So what do you think? Are they just watching or watching everything? Even CJNG's product lines have evolved. Meth and fentanyl remain foundational, but new trends appear. Pharmaceutical counterfeits with real APIs, indistinguishable from regulated medications, shipped through front companies that register as medical NGOs. In early 2024, a seizure in Guatemala uncovers crates of vitamins containing high-concentration opioids. The crates are stamped with the logo of a children's nutrition charity. The charity is real. The shipments were not authorized. When questioned, the charity director says, "We've never heard of that supplier," and yet, no lawsuits are filed. The case vanishes, just like the crates. Meanwhile, Nemesio's name resurfaces, but not how you might expect. In a university paper published out of UNAM, a sociology student writes a thesis titled Mencho as Myth, Modern Statehood and Shadow Authority in Post-Cartel Mexico. The thesis goes viral in niche academic circles. It argues that CJNG under Nemesio has shifted from criminality to a parallel form of legitimacy, that El Mencho no longer functions as a crime boss, but as a phantom policy architect, using violence as punctuation, not grammar. When a reporter tries to interview the author, they decline, citing travel complications. 2 weeks later, the student's apartment is robbed. Nothing stolen, laptop untouched. Only their thesis folder is moved slightly off-center, opened but not removed. Interpret that however you want. Back in Michoacan, Nemesio's own legacy is shifting. In towns like Aguililla, he's less discussed as a man and more referenced as a phase of history. Older residents say, "When Mencho kept order." Younger ones say, "My uncle worked for Jalisco, back when it mattered." Time is doing what bullets never could. It's aging the myth, and yet, something about that slow fade feels rehearsed, like a planned descent. CJNG continues investing in quiet permanence. Land titles, forest management programs, semi-legal import licenses for fertilizer and grain. These aren't schemes, they're assets. And the people managing them? Many have never met a trafficker. They're agronomists, economists, technocrats. The final phase? Legitimization by osmosis. No need to turn CJNG into a party or a corporation. Just let it resemble one until asking the difference feels impolite. Many people still think Nemesio is hanging on for survival, but others, they believe he's writing a transition memo. So what do you think? Does he fade, or does he simply finish? Because all signs suggest this. El Mencho may not be preparing for capture. He may be preparing for irrelevance by design. The desert breathes differently in Sonora. Heat rises like secrets from the asphalt. Mirage flickers stretch across long, straight roads, and time feels like it melts in the rearview mirror. Out here, distance is a kind of protection, and a kind of power. And somewhere near Hermosillo, a rumor begins to circulate. A convoy, 3 trucks, unmarked, moving quietly through rural farmland, is stopped by a local checkpoint. The soldiers check papers, glance at the cargo, and wave it through. Inside one of the trucks, buried beneath crates of dry milk, is a man with gray hair and a calm expression. No one knows his name. The license is fake, but later, when the checkpoint captain tries to report it, his commanding officer tells him that convoy was authorized. No explanation, just that. By now, in 2024, sightings of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes are like ghost stories. No photo, no proof. But the ripple always follows. CJNG is running itself. That's not metaphor, it's infrastructure. From Baja to Veracruz, the organization is split into layers, cells within clusters, clusters within regions, each with their own economic division, enforcement arm, and community liaison. Think of it less like a cartel and more like a confederation of criminal municipalities. Each part knows its role, but few know the whole picture, and that's by design. Because Nemesio has become a concept, not just a commander, and concepts don't need to be caught. Mainstream historical fact. By 2024, official reports from Mexican and U.S. agencies suggest that CJNG's cellular structure has made it nearly impossible to dismantle, especially as parts of the organization operate through legal or semi-legal enterprises. Several regional operations seized by authorities were later reopened under new names within months. You cut the weed, but the root diagram has already changed. And even as this structure spreads, something strange starts happening. El Mencho's name begins to vanish, not from the news but from the mouths of his people. New recruits aren't told his story. They're taught procedure. His face isn't shown. His quotes aren't repeated. His legacy is filtered down into best practices. It's whispered that if a regional leader references him too much, Don Nemesio this, or El Jefe says that, they're quietly replaced, not punished, just removed from the board, because even the myth must retire itself if the system is to survive. So what do you think? Has Nemesio turned himself into a ghost or into policy? In Mexico City, political theorists begin floating a term, narco-neutralization. The idea that criminal organizations will eventually embed so deeply within state functions that their capture would result in a collapse of services, of logistics, even of regional economies. CJNG is often cited as case zero because in Michoacan and Jalisco, the question isn't, are they here? It's, would life function without them? That's a terrifying, unanswerable thought. In Zacatecas, where cartel violence once reached record highs, CJNG mediators now oversee negotiations between rival groups over access to key routes. Not with bullets, but with spreadsheets. A seized laptop reveals a full conflict tracking system. Names, affiliations, risk levels, suggested de-escalation techniques. One field reads simply, if no resolution by Q3, terminate contact and replace operator. Not mafia, management. Elsewhere, their tech division grows bolder. CJNG develops its own communications ecosystem. Satellite relays, solar-powered routers hidden in farm equipment, even a shortwave mesh network powered through old radio towers. Messages are broken into packets, distributed across devices like a criminal blockchain. A military unit intercepts a shipment of solar panels, perfectly legal, routed through a real energy startup. But beneath them, dismantled drone parts, memory drives, and a photo of a river crossing in Chiapas, labeled in German. This isn't a cartel exporting drugs, it's exporting methodology. And still, Nemesio's presence is felt, quietly. A shipment of precursors seized in Sinaloa is marked with the tag SR-19, a code Nemesio once used during his early logistics training. No one has used it in years. A message maybe, or maybe a signature, like a final brushstroke before stepping away from the painting. CJNG begins funding conflict mediation centers in disputed zones. Officially unaffiliated, these offices offer counseling, dispute resolution, even microloans. They're painted in neutral tones. The only giveaways? Security guards who never speak, and computers that wipe themselves after 5 minutes of inactivity. One worker says she's never met her direct superior, but her paycheck clears early every Friday. Maybe that's how power looks now, invisible, timely, and boringly efficient. Meanwhile, an elderly man with a cane and a limp is seen walking into a church in a small Michoacan town. He drops an envelope into the collection box, lights a candle, and leaves. The envelope contains 10,000 pesos in crisp bills. No name. Just a note for the roof, because shelter matters. It might mean nothing, but the priest locks the door every afternoon now, because Nemesio doesn't need to show up. He just needs people to wonder. Many people still think he's weakening, that he's on dialysis, that his inner circle is thinning. But others, those who study systems, believe the opposite, that he's entering his final form, irrelevant but unforgettable. The final trick? To become the silence that holds the room together. The coastal air in Manzanillo carries salt and secrets. Ships come and go like excuses, and container yards hum like indifferent giants. Everything looks legal, filed, tagged. But in between the cargo manifests and biometric gates, CJNG's fingerprints are everywhere. Not smeared, but stamped. It's now mid-2024, and if Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is still pulling strings, he's doing it with gloved hands and a metronome's rhythm. The port city is key. This is CJNG's bloodstream, where precursor chemicals arrive, where legitimate exports hide side compartments, where customs inspectors either look the other way or forget what they saw. Not because they were bribed, but because CJNG makes compliance feel normal. The port's digital infrastructure runs through a private contractor. That contractor's office is sleek, quiet, well-reviewed on employment boards. Their back end? Built on code once traced to an Eastern European security firm, now defunct, now forgotten. And still, the containers move. Mainstream historical fact. In 2024, international agencies flagged Manzanillo as one of the most strategically compromised ports in Latin America, citing its use by CJNG for both incoming chemical precursors and outgoing synthetic narcotics. Yet, arrests remain rare. Prosecutions, rarer still. Inside CJNG, this isn't luck. It's version control. Every year, their logistics network upgrades. Routes shift. Shell companies dissolve and respawn. Every lab has a mirrored twin. Every contact a fallback clone. And what's fascinating is this. Even internal players don't always know the real pipeline, because Nemesio's enduring genius isn't centralization, it's deliberate fragmentation. The fewer people who know everything, the less there is to lose. Many people still think this makes CJNG weaker, but others know better. So what do you think? Does it make them brittle or invincible? Meanwhile, outside Mexico, CJNG's foreign shadow expands. In Australia, fentanyl precursors traced back to Mexico appear in rural towns. In Germany, authorities intercept a package of powdered methamphetamine disguised as protein powder, stamped with a Jalisco-based nutritional brand. The operation? Real. The branding? Legally trademarked. The shipping address? An abandoned warehouse that burned down last year. It's not just global crime, it's supply chain mimicry. And what about Nemesio? Rumors now describe him as quieter than ever. Not due to age or fear, but because he's simply not needed anymore. Some say he lives on a compound surrounded by lemon trees and wireless jammers. Others claim he hasn't touched a phone in years. A few believe he's already dead, but that his rules live on, encoded into every level of the machine. This year, a mid-tier lieutenant is found dead in Colima. Clean shot to the head, no signs of struggle. Inside his pocket, A note with a single phrase. Too curious. Nobody asks what he was curious about, because Nemesio's doctrine is clear. Learn your role. Protect the structure. Don't look behind the curtain. Even familial ties are no longer shields. Rosalinda remains largely unseen, monitored, frozen in legal limbo. Their daughter Jessica, released from U.S. custody, relocates quietly under conditions no one discusses publicly. And Ruben, El Menchito, is still in a U.S. prison, still silent, but there are whispers that CJNG operatives receive coded instructions referencing dates tied to Ruben's sentencing. That shipment's slow just before his hearings, then surge again. Is it loyalty? A smokescreen? A signal? Nobody knows, but everyone responds. Inside the cartel, faith has evolved into behavioral doctrine. New members are taught. Never use your real name twice. Never meet in the same city 3 times. If you see something odd, report it. But don't ask if it mattered. These rules aren't barked by a boss. They're passed around like superstitions, more religious than operational. El Mencho doesn't enforce them anymore. His absence does. Meanwhile, CJNG shifts from force to economic glue. In Jalisco, a tech startup receives early-stage funding from a venture group. The group traces back to a trust in Panama. The trust's paperwork is flawless. But one name appears in the metadata of a scanned contract. A known alias tied to CJNG's real estate division. It's subtle, probably missed by 99% of investigators. But that 1%? They're starting to see the next frontier. CJNG isn't trying to beat the system. It's trying to become part of it. A retired intelligence officer puts it this way. The cartel doesn't want to outlive Nemesio. It wants to outlive the idea that it was ever illegal. That's the end game. And Nemesio? He's no longer the kingpin. He's the blueprint. One final story makes the rounds in law enforcement circles. A field agent receives a tip. Nemesio is in a private clinic under an alias, recovering from surgery. The tip includes coordinates, a name, and a grainy photo. A small team mobilizes. They find the clinic. They find the room. Inside, an empty bed, warm to the touch. On the nightstand, a small notebook. 1 page, handwritten. The more you chase me, the more you carry me with you. Nothing else. And just like that, he's gone again. The city of Guadalajara hums in the summer dusk. Neon signs flicker lazily over panaderia windows. Taxis honk without urgency, and families gather outside corner stores sipping agua fresca. It feels normal, familiar, but like every CJNG stronghold, the normalcy here is curated by the absence of questions. By now, in late 2024, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes has become a mathematical ghost, not erased, but factored out. His design still holds, tight, quiet, and painfully efficient. And yet, something begins to shift. This section of the story isn't about power growing, it's about loyalty mutating. CJNG has reached a point of saturation, not just in territory, but in philosophy. And the next battle is no longer external. It's internal calibration. The first crack shows in Valencia. L85, Eric Valencia Salazar, once a key CJNG co-founder, re-emerges in whispers. He'd split from Nemesio years ago after internal disagreements and arrest. But now he's back, either with quiet approval or as a rogue player with his own agenda. And suddenly, trusted operators begin switching sides, not with betrayal, but with reasoned deviation. One CJNG regional leader in Nayarit receives an encrypted message with a list of shipments he never scheduled. The message is signed not by Nemesio, but with an emblem, a stylized feather. A week later, he switches allegiance. His cell doesn't resist. They adapt, because by now, CJNG isn't one body. It's ecosystems, and ecosystems evolve with or without the sun. Mainstream historical fact. Intelligence reports in 2024 suggest that CJNG has splintered into aligned sub-entities, many of which still use CJNG's branding and infrastructure, but no longer operate with centralized authority. Law enforcement can't agree whether this weakens the cartel or makes it unkillable. So what's happening? Two possibilities. Nemesio is orchestrating a deliberate decentralization to ensure longevity. Nemesio's grip is slipping, and his creation is becoming sentient. And that's where the question sharpens. So what do you think? Has El Mencho built a self-sustaining beast? Or has the beast begun writing its own instructions? In Tapalcatepec, a CJNG lieutenant is killed not by rivals, but by his own men. After it's discovered he was still referencing Nemesio in recruitment speeches. They weren't afraid he'd say too much. They were afraid he hadn't let go. Because now, the new generation of CJNG isn't worshiping a person. They're defending a rhythm. They don't say El Jefe anymore. They say the pulse. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, a quiet proposal circulates among certain congressional aides. What if, instead of direct confrontation, the government offered conditional absorption of CJNG's legal entities, agriculture, construction, logistics, into state-regulated cooperatives? It's unofficial. It's absurd. It's only whispered in sealed rooms. But someone is listening. 2 weeks later, one of the proposal's early authors receives a text with no sender ID. It reads, "Interesting offer. Let's make the state more efficient together." The aide deletes the message, but the phone stays powered off for a month. Back on the streets, something deeper sets in. In Jalisco, graffiti changes. Where CJNG tags once marked walls like warnings, new symbols appear. Feathers, spirals, code patterns. No names, just glyphs. Children begin mimicking them in notebooks. One teacher asks what they mean. A boy says, "My uncle says it's just how things work now." That's the future Nemesio bet on, a generation that inherits obedience without explanation. Even in New York, federal agencies begin noticing odd ripples. Money laundering cases that once pointed to obvious shell firms now bounce through philanthropic fintech networks. Small grants to literacy programs, eco-initiatives in Brazil, orphanage sponsorships in Belize. When questioned, the grant managers shrug. The money cleared. The mission checks out. One investigator mutters, "It's like fighting fog with tweezers," because Nemesio's idea wasn't just survival. It was integration so seamless, its removal would feel like amputation. And yet, there are still signs he exists. A shipment intercepted at the Guatemala border includes a box of hand-carved chess pieces. One piece, the king, is missing. A burner phone seized from a logistics handler includes only one saved message. La última jugada no tiene testigos. The last move has no witnesses. And in a small town in Jalisco, a priest discovers an envelope on the altar after Mass. Inside is a single feather, dipped in ash, and a note that reads, "Even the architect knows when to walk out before the roof collapses." So what do you think? Is El Mencho preparing his last move? Or has he already made it? Because as CJNG continues to fracture, franchise, and fossilize into the institutions around it, his own presence feels less necessary. He is not a man in hiding. He is now an unused key, left behind in case the door ever locks again. There's a kind of silence in the Sierra Madre that doesn't feel empty. It feels guarded. The wind moves cautiously, as if it's been told to keep secrets. Somewhere in that silence, a dirt path winds to a ranch that may or may not still exist. Locals claim it was burned down. Others say it's never been touched. Everyone agrees on one thing. Don't ask twice. It's late 2024, and Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is no longer discussed as a fugitive. He's referenced like an old codebase, outdated but still foundational. CJNG continues operating at full strength, but its language, structure, and tone are changing. The name Mencho appears less in wiretaps. Intercepts of radio chatter now refer to instructions coming from the algorithm, the signal, or simply la regla. And if you think that sounds more like a sci-fi novel than organized crime, you're not wrong, because this isn't just evolution. It's modular replacement, mainstream historical fact. By late 2024, U.S. intelligence analysts began referring to CJNG as a multi-headed entity, with no central leadership, but consistent operational behavior. The term menchismo was coined internally to describe the lingering influence of Nemesio's strategies long after his direct control faded. CJNG doesn't broadcast orders anymore. It suggests formats. Cell A knows to delay a shipment by 2 days if Cell B's lead operator is arrested. Cell C knows to prepay local officials 3 months in advance in an election year. Not because anyone told them, but because that's the model. It's machine behavior, interpreted by humans. One mid-level courier in Guanajuato tells a journalist anonymously, "We're not told what to do. We're just shown what happens when we don't follow the math." And the math? It's all Mencho's playbook, digitized through repetition. Meanwhile, Nemesis, yes, that's the nickname, resurfaces in a leaked intel memo from the Colombian government. It refers to a ghost investor in several joint maritime projects operating in the Pacific corridor. The investor's name never appears, but his behaviors match a pattern long suspected to be CJNG's overseas reach. The memo closes with a curious phrase: "If he's not there, then why does the tide change when he moves?" That's the thing about Nemesio. Even his absence moves things. Back in Michoacan, CJNG is no longer seen as foreign. It's local governance in a more functional outfit. There's a road crew fixing potholes ahead of a festival. No banner, no city truck, just clean work and a folded envelope handed to the event organizer. From the ones who like music without interruption. In Veracruz, a retired judge opens a bakery with help from an unnamed investor. The only rule? No cameras in the shop. When asked why, he just smiles and says, "It's better this way." No threats, just agreements with invisible ink. Even in the financial sector, CJNG's influence has gone post-physical. A banking analyst in Mexico City reviews quarterly reports from an agricultural fund and notices hyper-efficient capital mobility. Small amounts of money routed through 200 accounts in 24 hours. Each amount legally justifiable. Each movement faster than regulatory response. She flags it. Her supervisor deletes the flag. 2 weeks later, she receives an unsolicited job offer from a logistics firm in Belize. Double the pay. Remote work. Wellness stipend. She doesn't respond. The email deletes itself. So what do you think? Coincidence or recruitment protocol? CJNG's morality code also appears to be shifting, not softening, refining. Operators are now trained in non-lethal enforcement methods. Broken bones, not broken headlines. Drones are used for avoidance, not airstrikes. Even threats are crafted like invoices. Clear, unemotional, professional. They don't say, "Do this or die." They say, "If this isn't fixed, we'll have to review your replacement." One social media influencer in Jalisco makes a video mocking CJNG graffiti. It goes viral. 3 days later, he posts a new video. A book recommendation, soft piano music, no explanation. Commenters notice his voice has changed, so has his address. But the video? Surprisingly soothing. Even cultural output begins to reflect Mencho's enduring shape. Corridos used to scream his name. Now they describe his absence. Songs about men with no shadows, plans that run without clocks, and stories told only when no one's left to argue. In Sinaloa, a radio station receives an anonymous USB drive. It contains 10 tracks, each a minute long, composed entirely of wind sounds and distant roosters. No vocals, no metadata. The station plays them at midnight, calls them ghost psalms. Listeners call in. No one hangs up first. And in all this, Nemesio remains unverified. Alive? Probably. Active? Indirectly. Necessary? Less and less. Because the greatest trick wasn't staying hidden. It was teaching the system to not miss him. CJNG today is built like a virus that becomes part of its host. Undetectable, unremovable, even useful. That's not just survival. That's legacy by absorption. And so, as fiscal year closes and new election cycles threaten new power vacuums, the name El Mencho is once again searched in Google Trends, spiking for a day, then vanishing. Not because he came back, but because a cartel moved smoothly and someone thought he must have had a hand in that, even if he didn't, especially if he didn't. In the shaded halls of Washington, D.C., policy analysts huddle over charts. Arrows point across continents. Thick red lines connect Michoacan to Manila, Guadalajara to Guatemala City, Colima to Queensland. But in the center of it all, circled faintly in pencil, is one word. Mencho. Not CJNG, not Jalisco. Just that. Like a signature burned into global policy without attribution. And in late 2024, that becomes the dilemma. Because if Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is no longer operational, why is everything still working? A classified DEA internal memo poses the question plainly. If Nemesio has disappeared, and no chaos followed, then how many of our assumptions are wrong? What they're really asking is, was he ever truly necessary to the empire he built? And deeper still, is CJNG's greatest strength now its ability to forget its own maker? Mainstream historical fact. As of late 2024, law enforcement across Mexico and the U.S. increasingly referred to CJNG as post-organizational. That is, no longer a pyramid, but a cloud of operational behaviors inherited through practice, not permission. Like a religion whose prophet has gone silent, but whose scripture self-updates. So what do you think? Was Mencho the myth required to birth the machine? Or is he still in the server room, quietly tuning it? Some say the answer lies in Jiquilpan, Nemesio's hometown. Once a target for raids and operations, it's now a model of eerie calm. No shootouts, no flags, just compliance wrapped in community care. A school gets rebuilt. A clinic receives unmarked donations. The soccer field's lights stay on later. Locals say it's not because they're afraid. It's because they already know how things are supposed to run. You don't need threats when muscle memory does the job. Elsewhere, a former Mencho associate gives an anonymous interview. Voice scrambled, face blurred. He says, "There was a time when you'd wait for his call. Now, the call comes from a system. You don't know who's on the other end. But the instructions are right." He's asked if he thinks Mencho's still alive. He pauses. If he is, he's already started the funeral. Not for himself, for the version of the world where one man has to be feared. That statement, ambiguous, poetic, terrifying, spreads among those who track criminal dynamics. Analysts begin using a new term, operational mythology. The idea that crime networks no longer need actual leaders, only the persistent echo of a leader-shaped behavior. And it isn't just theoretical. In Brazil, port authorities intercept a cocaine shipment perfectly concealed inside coffee bean crates. The supplier is a shell firm based in Jalisco. The paperwork flawless, the route indirect, the bank trail clean. Only one clue. The cargo was labeled with a code used in a 2017 CJNG shipment. 7 years later, different people, same fingerprints, same design. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, street-level operatives begin referencing El Código, an informal doctrine that mimics CJNG's structure but applies it to local gangs. Territories are no longer claimed with colors, but with workflow efficiency. One gang even begins a practice of performance reviews, modeled off leaked CJNG business templates. Let that sink in. Performance reviews. In a street gang. That's how far Mencho's influence has trickled. Beyond violence, beyond fear, into governance by mimicry. In Panama, financial officers freeze a suspicious charity fund. Within 48 hours, 3 unrelated NGOs in Central America file defamation claims, each linked by back-end architecture to the original fund. The paperwork is intricate, the language legal. The original freeze is lifted, and somewhere quietly, a supply chain unpauses. It's no longer a question of whether Mencho exists. It's which version of him is running right now, because Nemesio the man may be frail, fading, or gone. But Nemesio the template, still uploading. When final oddity arises, a bookstore in Querétaro receives a bulk order for 300 copies of The Art of War. The purchaser is a consulting firm with no employees. Payment clears from a Luxembourg account. Delivery address: a now vacant warehouse once used by a dissolved ag-tech startup. No laws broken, no red flags raised, but the books never arrive. The delivery truck is found idling in the countryside, empty, no signs of struggle. Just one thing: the driver's cap on the dashboard. Inside it, a note that reads, "Some strategies are meant to be read. Others are already lived." And that maybe is Mencho's last performance, not as a fugitive, not as a ghost, but as an idea that doesn't require permission to keep breathing. So what do you think? Is he still somewhere, watching? Or has he become something else entirely? Something we're not trained to catch, because we're still looking for men, instead of their memes. Somewhere along the winding roads of Michoacán, there's a tree that's older than all the feuds, all the bribes, all the arrests. Locals call it El Centinela, the Sentinel. They say it's seen men rise with bullets in their boots and fall with whispers in their sleep. And lately, they say it leans just slightly to the east. No one remembers it doing that before. Superstition? Maybe. But in the world Mencho built, symbols don't wait for confirmation. They simply become policy. It's early 2025 now, and what's left of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is no longer measured in sightings or surveillance. It's measured in influence response time. A warehouse raided in Veracruz triggers a cargo reroute in Honduras. A low-level accountant arrested in Guadalajara leads to a fake non-profit deactivating in Belize. Not because anyone told them to, because that's the protocol embedded in CJNG's marrow. And if Mencho didn't write it all, he trained the writers. Mainstream historical fact. By 2025, multiple governments classify CJNG as a non-hierarchical operational syndicate, an entity that moves based on principles rather than people. This makes targeted enforcement nearly impossible, as new operatives inherit not roles, but decision trees. In essence, CJNG runs on if-then statements. So what do you do when the man behind the original if is gone? That's the catch. You don't need him anymore. There's a metaphor used by some intelligence officers: the ripple ship. A vessel that creates waves long after it's passed, making it impossible to tell where it actually is. Nemesio became that ship. He's not the wave. He's the part of the sea that remembers how to move. Back in Jalisco, a group of teenagers open a car wash. Cheap rates, good service, clean books. But beneath it, a mesh of SIM cards, burner phones, and a rotating cast of encrypted messengers. The wash isn't a front, it's a switchboard. And none of the kids know the full picture. They just know the shifts, the names to expect. the code phrases to reply with. When asked who runs it, they shrug. Nobody runs it. It runs itself. That line gets written into a classified report under the title Decentralized Enforcement Nodes, but locals just call it the Wash. A few cities away, an old lieutenant, once close to Mencho, dies quietly in a hospice facility. No guard, no noise, no enemies. His only request, that his ashes be scattered in the hills where signal reception drops. He leaves no will, no confession, just a small slip of paper. I was a good operator, but the signal didn't need me. That phrase appears later on an encrypted chat channel used by middle-tier CJNG logistics personnel. The meme spreads like wildfire. Even rivals begin to imitate it. In Chiapas, a small cartel reorganizes its ranks into pods, autonomous cells that take orders only through behavioral templates. Their success rate jumps 18%. When questioned about the change, their leader says, "If Mencho figured out how to make an army without a general, why shouldn't I copy the homework? Because that's what Mencho was becoming. Open source cartelism." His old enemies, the Sinaloa remnants, the Gulf holdouts, the Zetas fragments, they no longer try to eliminate CJNG. They try to extract its architecture, and still no one sees him. So where is he? Well, there's this story. A man, older but alert, walks into a small clinic in Guatemala for a basic checkup. He gives a name, pays in cash, and answers questions with gentle ease. He jokes with the nurse, reads the safety posters, and leaves without incident. Later, reviewing security footage, a clerk gets nervous, because while the name doesn't ring any bells, the eyes do. He files a report. 2 days later, the clinic receives a donation of brand new equipment. Dental chairs, ultrasound machines, modern lighting. No return address, just a note taped to the packages. For your silence and your service. Is it him? Nobody investigates, because by now, the myth is too useful, too heavy to carry, but too valuable to discard. Even academics begin referencing him differently. In one university symposium on modern decentralized governance, a professor shows a flow chart of Mencho's known structure, with one caption, "The Ghost Protocol, leadership as residue." Students laugh, then they stop, then they start taking notes, because it's not just about cartels anymore. It's about systems that outlive their creators. And Mencho? He may have been a tyrant, a trafficker, a terror, but he was also, undeniably, an engineer. He designed a criminal ecosystem that doesn't crumble with arrest or death. It adapts, refactors, migrates, like software, like fungus, like ideology. And the more governments chase the man, the more CJNG evaporates into everything else. Into ports, into pension funds, into pseudonyms on procurement contracts. So what do you think? Is Nemesio still alive? Or is he something worse? Something that doesn't need to be? Because in the silence that follows a shift in shipment or a change in leadership, the only sound left is the pattern repeating itself, and no one asks for permission. They just follow the next instruction. If you walk through the alleys of Tepalcatepec in early 2025, you'll notice something strange, an absence of tension. No young men flashing weapons, no graffiti signaling allegiance. Even the dogs bark with less urgency. But don't mistake that for peace. It's not silence, it's compliance. A man steps into a taqueria and pays for 6 other tables without saying a word. No one thanks him. No one asks why. The cashier nods and slides an envelope under the counter. That's the system. Invisible handshakes. Transactional order. Mencho's enduring choreography. And across the region, that choreography is now dancing without a conductor. CJNG cells once rooted in command structures now operate with operational faith. Not blind loyalty, but the belief that the system, left alone, still works. Like an old engine that keeps turning because the parts know the rhythm better than the driver ever did. Mainstream historical fact. In 2025, law enforcement agencies formally reported that CJNG had become non-attributable, a term typically reserved for cyber warfare groups, now applied to a cartel. This meant any act attributed to CJNG could not be traced to any specific individual, just the pattern. That pattern includes micro-distributions of product with no central invoicing, leadership swaps handled via encrypted consensus, logistics chains rebuilt on gig worker models. In essence, CJNG has become an algorithmic crime template. And what about Nemesio? Rumors place him in Panama, in Argentina, in a remote corner of Chiapas. One even claims he died in 2021, and we've been chasing an echo, but no one can prove it, not even close. Which is why his story now lives not in sightings, but in design footprints. One DEA analyst off record puts it this way: "We're not hunting a man anymore. We're trying to find where he last edited the code." That's how it works now. Because CJNG has become modular, cells can unplug, relocate, reconnect elsewhere with ease. Regional actors don't need phone calls. They wait for indicators, a paused shipment, a missed payment, a changed streetlight. That's their green light to act or stand down. And those who defy this rhythm, they don't get bullets. They get excluded, removed from the current, isolated, forgotten. One regional commander who tried to reassert personal control found his bank accounts frozen, not by authorities, but by internal filters. His safe houses emptied. His bodyguards simply didn't show up the next morning. He wasn't executed. He was exiled from relevance. That's worse, because in a system built by Mencho, power isn't retained, it's rented. Renewable only if you stay compatible with the code base. So what does the code reward? Efficiency, discretion, continuity, not bloodlust, not bravado. In fact, violence is now seen as a flaw in optimization. CJNG enforcers today are trained in conflict cost modeling. They assess the social, financial, and media impact of every decision before it's made. Killings are rarer, targeted disappearances more common, public messaging minimal. Even the aesthetics have changed. No flashy cars, no gold-plated pistols. Operatives now dress like rideshare drivers and municipal clerks. If you look twice, you're looking too hard. And that was always Mencho's point. Back in 2012, when he began transitioning CJNG from chaos to calculus, insiders said he kept repeating one phrase during meetings: "The real cartel isn't the men, it's the math." Most didn't understand then. They do now, and perhaps the ultimate proof? Copycats. Small criminal networks in Asia, Africa, even Eastern Europe now study CJNG's model. Not for the drugs, for the structure. White papers circulate in the dark web outlining franchise frameworks modeled on CJNG's ghost leader system. Some scholars call it Menchoism, the idea that a criminal organization can achieve post-leader functionality by embedding adaptive logic into its every layer. Sound dystopian? It is, but it's real. In Mexico City, a think tank accidentally leaks a document titled Mencho as Governance Model. It includes charts comparing CJNG decision-making cycles to those of local municipalities. The cartel wins: fewer delays, fewer resource gaps, higher field compliance. The document is pulled within hours, but someone prints it, shares it, learns from it, because in a world tired of inefficient hierarchies, Mencho's ghost sells efficiency. And as new players rise, they're not asking who leads CJNG. They're asking, what's the code? Because if they can copy that, they don't need Nemesio. They just need his logic. And somewhere in that logic, if you follow the trail long enough, you might still find the old man. Not with guns, not with gold, just quietly watching from a distance, maybe behind a cracked screen, maybe from a porch in the hills, smiling not because he escaped, but because he's no longer required In a dimly lit room inside a U.S. embassy somewhere in Central America, a junior intelligence officer scrolls through intercepted messages. Most are noise, code words wrapped in slang, logistics buried in emojis. But then she finds a phrase that freezes her mid-scroll. La hidra no muere cuando duermes, solo sueña de otra manera. The hydra doesn't die when it sleeps. It just dreams differently. She flags it, tags the language, and attaches it to a folder labeled CJNG, Ideological Drift, because by now CJNG is no longer just a cartel, it's become a philosophy. And Mencho, he's not a leader anymore. He's a legend in circulation, used by operatives like currency, referenced when needed, invoked when convenient. In some circles, he's not even spoken of by name, just El Patron, or sometimes El Chero, the zero, the origin, the silent integer around which everything else is computed. But in places like Colima, that legacy feels very real. A shipping container docks quietly at the port. The bill of lading is flawless. The port officer scans it twice, then again. Everything clears. But something inside him, call it instinct, or maybe just the memory of a name, tells him not to open it. He stamps it, waves it through, lights a cigarette. By dawn, he finds a stack of pesos beneath the seat of his truck. No note, no warning, just compensation. That's compliance without conversation. CJNG doesn't enforce rules anymore. It expects alignment, mainstream historical fact. By 2025, Mexican federal reports confirm that CJNG had significantly reduced its reliance on direct bribes or coercion. Instead, its primary enforcement tool had become systemic reward loops, incentivizing silence, rewarding efficiency, and marginalizing disruption through absence of access rather than violence. That's something new, something eerily stable. Even rival cartels struggle to keep up. Where they waste resources asserting dominance, CJNG fades into relevance without spectacle. In California, a small financial services company collapses after regulators discover a dozen shell firms nested in its investment arm. Tracing the money back leads nowhere. Just false names, AI-generated executive photos, and invoices signed with alias codes, but one signature repeats across multiple documents. MNC05. Analysts believe it stands for Mencho Cell 5, or maybe Model Node Cell, 5th iteration. Either way, it's not a person. It's a placeholder inside a living model. The same placeholder appears weeks later in a batch of imported automotive parts in Costa Rica, and then again in a pharmaceutical tender in Oaxaca. Same code, same formatting. Not a name, a signature of style. So what do you do with that? One theory goes, Mencho, if still alive, has gone full executive monk, living quietly under assumed names, checking operations like a software engineer reviews system logs. No violence, no travel, just monitoring, watching the dream run itself. Another theory, he's already gone, dead or missing. But his final instruction, his parting line of code, was enough. And now CJNG doesn't need decisions, it just needs consistency. In Tepic, a mid-tier operator gets offered a government deal. Full immunity for cooperation. He declines, not because he fears retribution, but because he genuinely believes the system will rebuild itself if broken. I'm not afraid, he tells his handler. I just think it wouldn't matter. And that might be the most terrifying part of it all. Mencho's design outgrew Mencho. There's precedent for this. Systems that outlive their creators. Myths that evolve into frameworks. Think religion. Think open source code. Think rogue AI. CJNG, in its current state, is a blend of all three. And in some backrooms, quietly and very cautiously, governments are beginning to adapt. Rather than dismantle CJNG, some agencies propose a long game of absorption, letting parts of its infrastructure merge into legal systems. Not approval, not endorsement, just acknowledgement of permanence. One internal memo proposes this phrasing: CJNG is not a group, it is a geography of behavior, and in Michoacan, a former Mencho loyalist now runs a tech startup focused on encrypted communications. He denies cartel ties, but his early investors? All cash. No equity asks. No press. When asked about his past, he laughs. There is no past, he says, sipping coffee. Only good architecture. A pause. And the blueprint still works. So what do you think? Was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes a villain? A visionary? A virus? Or was he just the first man to stop believing in permanence and start building for replaceability? Because when a man like that disappears, when his story fades from newsrooms and his name becomes code, he doesn't die. He becomes every system that learns to function without needing to say thank you. The year is 2025, and in a dusty plaza near Guadalajara, a band plays slow corridos under yellow string lights. Children run between tables. Abuelas sip micheladas and talk politics. And a man, quiet, plain shirt, weathered hands, leans against a wall and watches. No one greets him. No one seems to notice. But the space around him holds just a little more still. He lights a cigarette, takes one drag, and vanishes into the crowd. Maybe it was no one. Maybe it was him. That's the thing about legends like Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. They're not built to end. They're built to drift into architecture. Back in the capital, Mexico's intelligence services debate policy. Some propose escalation. Others warn that traditional enforcement models are no longer compatible. One analyst coins a new phrase: CJNG is less like a tree, more like a fungal network. You can't cut it down because it's already in the soil. And they're not wrong. Mainstream historical fact. By late 2025, CJNG operations have been linked to logistics chains involving not just drugs, but construction materials, real estate, agricultural supply contracts, and even public sanitation tenders. The organization doesn't just survive, it diversifies, quietly anchoring into infrastructure. Meanwhile, the myth of Mencho enters folklore. He's no longer a narco, he's a code phrase. In Veracruz, a street kid hears a dealer refer to someone as puro Mencho. Not a person, a style. A way of doing things without being seen. In Chiapas, a former sicario teaches conflict resolution classes to municipal employees. His worksheets? Reworded CJNG response protocols. Disguised as civic planning. In a prison near Monterrey, 3 rival gangs merge into one cooperative labor unit. They're not friends, but they've adopted the same CJNG-inspired handbook. Minimal noise, maximum yield, no drama. And in California, a podcast on cybercrime devotes an entire season to the Ghost Framework, citing CJNG as the most successful criminal transformation in the last 20 years. One guest puts it bluntly: Mencho figured out what Silicon Valley still hasn't, how to leave the room without losing control of it. So where does that leave us? Back in Tepalcatepec, where it all began, the mayor gives an interview. He's asked whether Mencho's influence is still felt. He pauses, then says, "The town runs on rules now, but no one remembers who wrote them, and no one questions why they still work. That's not a dodge. That's a truth etched in infrastructure. CJNG doesn't thunder anymore. It hums. Beneath contracts, inside schedules, behind every well-timed delivery truck. Violence is rare now, not because they've softened, but because the math doesn't require it. And Mencho, whatever's left of him, if anything, is likely folded into farmland, rewritten into franchise blueprints, whispered in the gaps between power outages. Maybe he's gone. Maybe he's still watching, quietly satisfied, but the greater likelihood is that he succeeded too well. He created something that no longer needs him, and that's the legacy, not domination. Design, a system so elegantly adaptive that it forgets its own author. Not out of disrespect, but out of efficiency, because in the new CJNG, permanence isn't about name, it's about flow. And Mencho, he became the flow. Now, as dusk cools the plaza and the music softens to a hum, you can feel it. The Empire still runs, the signals still ping, the road's still open, and somewhere, maybe in the silence between shipments, maybe in the stillness of a contract perfectly fulfilled, he exhales, not a king, not a martyr, just the man who figured out how to disappear into system memory and stay there forever. So now, as the final echoes of Mencho's story soften and drift into the dark, let's slow our own pace too. Let the names and dates fade gently from your mind. You don't need to hold them. The weight of the Empire, the whispered codes, the lives orbiting that quiet ghost. They're far from here now, far from the quiet of your room, far from the rhythm of your breath, which has likely slowed without you noticing. That's good. That's the body saying we've heard enough for tonight. Maybe there's a lesson in Mencho's vanishing act, something about knowing when to speak and when to retreat, when to lead loudly and when to let the system take over. Or maybe it's just a reminder that even in the noisiest stories, silence always finds its way back in. Right now, let that silence stretch out around you. There's no cartel here, no shadows behind the door, just the sound of your own safety, your own space, your own stillness. So breathe in, then let it go. Let the last remnants of the Jalisco Empire fade to grayscale behind your eyelids. There's nothing more you need to do. You've listened well. You've earned your rest. Close your eyes now and let the ghost fade.